Well, only took me 1 year this time. Okay, it was really like 4 months since I didn't start playing until November and finished it in February. And on the game's first anniversary as well. Campfires are for talking, so if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to recap. If you've seen my review of the first Octopath Traveler, then you know that I have a very love-hate relationship with that game. At the time, I was so hyped to see Team Asano taking a crack at a new IP with that gorgeous little RPG on the Switch. I got the Switch, got the game, and then, well, the thumbnail said it all. I found some parts of Octopath Traveler to be really well handled, but others were just not right, poor quality, or almost unfinished. Trying to do too much in one game. So when the announcement trailer for Octopath Traveler 2 was revealed during a Nintendo Direct, I was apprehensive. I was happy for Octopath fans who were probably starved for a new game after 4 years of nothing save the NA release of Champions of the Continent, which I have tried. It's not bad, the gameplay's fun, I like having my Bravely crossover characters, and I'm excited about where the first arc of the game ends based on Japan spoilers. Getting sidetracked. Seeing that trailer, I wasn't really certain about playing it. I knew that some of my viewers would want me to check it out, which is totally reasonable. But I have my concerns. Was this game going to be worth the 80-something hours I would inevitably be putting into it? Was the journey going to be satisfying this time around? Or would I end up spending all that time only to be let down yet again? So, I decided to peek. Just a glimpse at a few things, not reading too much story so I could still be surprised, but I wanted to see if the game's finale was gonna be worth it. And it definitely caught my attention. So I picked the game up, streamed it over 4 months, and now here we are. Now when people ask me what my favorite anime is, I have to give that opinion in a very specific way. I will tell people that while Tiger and Bunny is my favorite anime, the best anime I've ever seen was Clannad. It's just more honest for me this way because I consider Clannad of higher quality than Tiger and Bunny, but I personally enjoy Tiger and Bunny more. And I feel now that is the way I'm going to have to tell people what my favorite game is. Because now, my favorite game of all time is Bravely Default 2. But the best game I've ever played is Octopath Traveler 2. This isn't hyperbole or recency bias. Octopath 2 is, bar none, the greatest game I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Every single thing I had a problem with regarding the first Octopath game, fixed. And then somehow they managed to improve upon that in nearly every single category. No joke, my list of complaints are so minute that they could almost be considered nitpicking. Almost, though. It's not flawless, but it is damn near close, and we will be looking at those issues much later down the line. But for now, I want to praise this masterpiece of a game as much as I can. This game moved me in ways I did not expect and do not expect to ever feel again, and I need to talk about it. And of course, I'll hold off on major story spoilers for as long as I can, but I will make sure to let you know when I'm getting into them because I will be going over those things, make no mistake. I have so much love and admiration welled up inside me for OT2, and I want to share these thoughts and feelings with all of you. The rises and minimal falls, the swerves and grooves all along this road, the ebb and flow of emotions, I want you to experience even a fraction of the bliss I felt going through Celestia. So, with all of that out of the way, let us begin this lengthy journey. Let's talk about the greatest game I've ever played, Octopath Traveler 2. If you are new to the channel, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and is appreciated to no end. Thank you. Well, we started the last discussion with the thing everyone knows Octopath for, so let's go back there again, the visuals. If there's one thing that anyone who has heard of Octopath knows, it's that HD 2D style. And this time, they've really outdone themselves. The game looks so unbelievably good compared to the first one. The lighting system is the main star here, with how insanely good it makes every other part of the game look. Every body of water is so enticing, as though you could just dive right in, and the blend between pixel art and elemental powers or attacks is just superb. Like, look at this! In terms of environment, there's a nice even split of familiar and new. While the Wildlands feel like a one-to-one remake of the Clifflands from OT1, places like New Delsta really bring home the idea that this world is evolving. The bustling cities, ready to burst from the signs of an early industrial era, are just advanced enough to show the growth of civilization, but not too much that they feel alienated from the other parts of Celestia that still have yet to catch up with the ways of the world. And the themes in these places... hold on, we're not at that part yet. But they're great. The autumn beauty of Flame Church, the complete vacation vibe called Tropahopu, or the freezing cold stronghold of Stormhail. Take your pick and become mesmerized by their beauty. Or their creepiness. We'll get to that place in due time. Having the Japanese feudal era region be a desert with Hinoeuma caught me off guard in particular. I thought that was a really cool shakeup to what desert regions in RPGs tend to turn into. And even though some locations may resonate with areas from Octopath 1, they are far more distinct and recognizable than before. Every area stands out in its own little way, and I don't feel like there's nearly as much copy-paste with dungeon visuals this time. The forests are all different, the sewers feel different, and the caves feel different. It's so refreshing when the environments are just slightly surprising and different from one another. I nearly fell out of my chair when I was navigating the Harborlands for the first time, and I came across an area in the open world where you walked across sandbars in the afternoon sun and waded through shallow waters looking for chests, or wandering through the wreckage of ruined ships. Exactly something I had suggested in my OT1 review. Now, I'm not saying that they watched my video and improved the game based on stuff that I specifically said, but I cannot even begin to tell you how happy I was to see more unique locales like this. As for sprites, the characters look great as ever. All the outfits look really good on everyone. There's a few funny ones too, like Merchant Temenos or Arcanist Oswald. Oh, look at them pecs. God damn! And the new weapon models are all great too. The new burst effects are stunning, they just exude power incarnate, and the ability animations themselves slap so hard. And enemy sprites? Don't even get me started. There's so many cool enemy designs this time around, and giving most of the bosses these amazing poses that change throughout the fight, on top of more cool animations whenever they do certain attacks, it's a level of passion that I will not fail to praise these artists on. Of course, the hand-drawn illustrations are breathtaking as always, plus this time we get 2 pieces of art for each character, one for day and one for night. I also enjoy the very subtle, and in some cases less subtle, ways that the arts depict the matching path actions for that character's time of day. The new camera also elevates the way you get to watch events unfold. Instead of being on a constant 2D plane where it only moves around in one direction a lot of the time, now the camera can turn, go on an angle, and do these 6 swooping shots whenever a character uses a max boost ability. And the cinematography of these cutscenes too, every scene is elevated with the way all of this enhanced lighting and angling is used. And finally, the UI has been cleaned up quite well. Not that OT1's was bad per se, I love this series' very clean take on menu design, but I felt the font was a little too small or thin at times in the first one, making it hard to read. That's been fixed in this one, and visual clarity is much stronger now while using the menus with that snazzy blue highlight. I just love the way it looks. They did such a good job with the visuals, it almost makes OT1 look like a beta of sorts. Now, Octopath 1 does look good, let's not disparage it too much, But again, whatever lighting system was introduced for OT2 is just leaps and bounds better. In fact, I think the only option was to go this hard on the visuals so it could even have a chance at standing up to how good the first game looked, since this is the main aspect that people who know very little about Octopath know it for. And I think that in most people's opinion, it has surpassed its predecessor tenfold. So, with us off to a fantastic start on the visual front, let's move on to the main part of the game, which is the game, the playing it part. Starting with combat. Once more, let's do a quick rundown of how combat works, since there are a new few additions from the first game. Octopath 2 is a turn-based RPG that manages to keep itself fresh for the modern-day gamer, as is the trademark of Team Asano. Turn orders for the current and next turns are shown above as you plan your strategy to destroy all enemies before you. Now, you could beat your little pixelated skull against these bow-wielding frogs or rats with shields, but ideally, you want to try to figure out your opponent's weaknesses. All mobs are weak to some combination of the 6 weapon types and 6 elements that Octopath has to offer, and every time they take a hit from something they are weak against, that enemy loses a shield point. Knock out all their shields and they will break, stunning that enemy and making them exposed to more damage from all sources for the remainder of the current turn and the entirety of the next turn. In addition to the traditional HP and MP values, one of which lets you bonk harder and the other being how much bonk your booty can take, there is the ever-important boost point, or BP, which is accumulated at a rate of 1 per turn, provided you didn't use any last turn. With a 5-point capacity per character, you can spend up to 3 BP on your turn to massively increase the potency of, well, whatever you plan to do. Be it a stronger bonk or longer lasting buffs, BP will be there when you need to go ham. New to Octopath 2 is the latent power mechanic. Whenever a character bonks or gets bonked, I'll stop now, they will build up charge for their latent power meter. Once it's filled, you can activate the latent power for an ultimate level ability that can greatly change the tide of battle. While divine skills still exist within each job and are incredibly powerful, yet require 3 BP to activate, latent powers are unique and individual to each traveler. These powers range from instantly filling Partitio's BP bar, a choice between one of 3 powerful attacks from Hikari, or taking 2 actions in a turn with Throne, just as some examples. And if you thought that still wasn't enough power, there are also EX skills. By locating hidden shrines around Celestia or reaching the end of a traveler's journey, you can unlock up to 2 powerful abilities that can only be used by the base job's holder. So for example, Casti is the only one who can use the Apothecary EX skills, as she is the starting Apothecary character, as goes for Oswald with Scholar EX skills, Ochep for the Hunter skills, and so on. These abilities and the latent powers tend to have more story or character relevance than the rest of the kits that they're part of, hence why they're locked to certain people. Bring all of this together alongside 12 customizable jobs, which we will cover shortly, and you have a combat system that is truly rewarding and extremely satisfying for those who take the time to master it. There's nothing that can match the satisfaction of counting down and finding the perfect amount of moves needed to break a boss that's about to do their wipe attack and narrowly escaping death, only to follow up with your own finishing moves. I also came to appreciate equipment a lot more in this entry compared to the first game. Levels were still important, but equipment is king in Octopath. You can be a few levels down on a boss and still yeet their ass into a shallow grave with ease if you set up your gear right. Boss enemies this time around feel a bit more unique, with very interesting mechanics in nearly every single encounter you can find. One of my absolute favorite moments in the entire game was the optional boss fight within the Decaying Temple in Hinoeuma against Karma. The dungeon requires that you only bring one person in your party to navigate it, so you're busy soloing your way past all these mid-level enemies, trying not to get wiped in the process. And when you finally reach the boss, who was ideally meant to be fought with Hikari, it was this beautiful back and forth sword duel, which culminated in the boss changing stances to one where he only had 1 shield point, but no weaknesses.
Oh, That's cool. That's fucking cool. I don't care if I get nuked here. That is so sick.
And so you had to come to the realization that you have to use the only ability in the warrior kit that can reduce shield points regardless of weakness, the Vengeful Blade counterattack. Or you could bring Agnia and use Ruinous Kick instead, or some other ability that lets you do that. Again, you have options. Either way, this fight was just one of many that impressed me with the mix-up mechanics that turned Big Man with Stick into something more. And again, on top of the cool combat puzzles, boss sprites were amazing. So many sick animations and form changes between phases. Great stuff. And I didn't even mention the music. But we'll get to that. I have a lot to say about the music, I promise. Now, of course, when you aren't caught up in the royals of combat, you have some traveling to do. The open world has never felt better to wander through. With the absolutely breathtaking visuals discussed prior, and the beautiful melodies accompanying you, the parts where you're trying to get to a new town are actually entertaining, especially with all the new goodies for you to find. Side paths to chests or bonus dungeons are cleverly placed throughout the world, though sometimes they may be too well hidden and you miss them forever, or you spot them immediately thanks to the radar. But that just means you get more content to experience as you go from town to town progressing the game. And finally, this time around, the dungeons feel unique. Again, as stated before, the forests are all memorable from each other, the caves stand out, and ancient ruins, while carrying similar motifs, are wonderful mazes to navigate. Plus, the developers learned their lesson from last time. If it's just gonna be a point A to point B path, littered with chests here and there, then you gotta make the experience of going through that place memorable, and keep it short. And Octopath 2 manages to do both. No dungeon overstays its welcome, they are just the right length to not get annoying, and they are visually appealing. And the journeying aspect of this game is even better now. Traveling from town to town is a great time, with the lengths of areas being just right and their themes... No, Red, not yet. Contain yourself. But seriously, the parts where you are trying to get to a new town are actually entertaining. Another tiny thing I'm grateful for about the boats? No interaction. You just automatically move from land to water seamlessly. And I think this needs to be noted, because if it was an interact every time, I'm sure I'd be complaining. But nah, I love the little boats. I also love the big boat. You know, the one you happen to get later on and just completely blows your mind because you now have access to the open seas on top of everything else. Just took me entirely by surprise. One major part of the gameplay experience is the new day and night system. Time of day actually matters in Octopath 2. Not only is it a pivotal theme to the overarching plot, but traveling around and entering zones at certain times determines what NPCs are available for interaction. Some people only come out at night, and certain enemies will only attack you during the day. Thus, each character now has 2 path actions to interact with the NPCs, a different one for night and day. It's a fun update to the system that makes the characters feel more useful and reduces the time wasted running back and forth from the tavern to get the right character for what you need. Alternatively, it also adds an interesting challenge in getting what you want from NPCs. Since some of them only appear at certain times of day, you'll have to decide how you'll approach a situation. If it's night and you want information out of a shady individual, do you want to try your luck by dueling them with Temenos' Coerce? Or do you just want to pay 5,000 leaves to get it over with through Hikari's Bribe? The choice is yours, and it's better that way. I'll be going over path actions in more detail later on when I talk about the characters individually. Thankfully, the devs also knew to be lenient with this system and gave us a time switch button that will immediately change it from day to night and vice versa when pressed. Extremely important and useful quality of life tool instead of making us wait around for a time change most of the time. Even dawn and dusk matter in a few rare cases, but these are the only times that you really have to wait around for the right time. I think this is beyond fine. The system is already fantastic as is. There is so much in this game to see and do, and with day and night, it almost feels like there's twice as many things to do, so it's always enjoyable. Gameplay, 10 out of 10. And to touch on the last major aspect of gameplay, let's talk about team customization. Once more, Octopath offers a selection of jobs that can be customized and paired together to make your own unique team. I get the impression this time around that you will see more variations in team compositions between players than there were in the first game, but this is purely anecdotal. That said, each character has more interesting combinations that they can take on in this entry. For example, you could give Hikari a job like Apothecary for better sustain in challenges, or you could go the Mystic Knight path and give him Arcanist so he can share his Vengeful Blade counterattack with all allies. Just like in Octopath 1, there are 8 basic jobs that each traveler starts off with one of, but can later multi-class into a different one alongside their base class. The main difference here is that in OT1, you could only equip one secondary instance of a class to another character, since the shrines only gave you one extra for each base job. But in OT2, each base job now has up to 3 licenses that can be earned from their respective guilds. The first license is always given right upon joining, but the next 2 licenses require certain conditions to be met in order to claim them, granting you the ability to have up to a full party of people with the same job, provided you are also using the Traveler who starts with that job. So for example, if you get all 3 merchant licenses, you can bring Partitio and 3 other people with merchant equipped into battle, and then just toss money at hired help all day long if you want. I really like the license system. It's a great way to make people work for a good reward, it's got awesome theming, and it opens up team building a lot more than limiting you to only one extra holder of a job at a time. Now, there are 4 advanced jobs once again, and though some of them have some carryover elements from the previous game's extra classes, they are new-ish in flavor and behavior. We have Arms Master to replace War Master, which relies on equipping specific powerful weapons to access your abilities. Arcanist takes over the Sorcerer's role of Advanced Magic User, though it's less many spells and more a few spells but lots of cool buffs. And Conjurer is the new love child of Ruinlord and Starseer, but the runes this one gives feel a bit weaker than Ruinlord's. It has some other neat support abilities as well, with one really clutch save my team skill thrown in there as a last-ditch effort to advertise itself for your team. Of course, if those 3 take all the stuff from the previous 4 jobs, then what remains for the last one? Well, leave it to Inventor to be one of the more interesting and unbelievably strong jobs in the game. The Inventor has abilities with no MP cost, but rather puts them on an X-turn cooldown after you spend a turn repairing a used invention. It's a really neat class, has cool progression based on collecting materials to craft each invention instead of spending JP, and has some very broken passives, such as Step Ahead, which just gives an extra turn to anyone who has equipped it at the start of combat. A whole turn that the enemy doesn't get to act during. And though you can only equip one person with Inventor at a time, passives do not get the same treatment. So yeah, Step Ahead, S tier passive. The moment I unlocked Inventor, it went on my Hikari. And it never came off. As proof, here's my Hikari's job point reservoir, which is more stable than the Federal Reserve's. Yep. I'll talk more specifics about the 8 main jobs when I get to the characters later, mostly because of EX skills and how the unique character abilities flavor my perception of each job. But overall, I feel that the jobs are pretty decent and fun to play. There are some variations in the kits from how they were in Octopath 1, but there's also plenty of returning or reworked abilities for each class, and they all feel like solid foundations on which you can build a little army of death on, taking down any boss that dares stand in your way. Which brings us to our next topic. We have finally reached a point of critique. Hooray! Now, I don't say that to mean that I think the difficulty is entirely bad, just that I had things to say. Now, when I played the first Octopath, I went from lowest to highest level chapters, which meant jumping around from story to story and trying to keep everyone's story progression as equal as I could. So I did the exact same thing this time, and I definitely noticed some differences. Overall, I had a much bigger issue with the feel of the difficulty in the first game, as it felt a lot more staircase-like, where the difficulty just kept spiking over and over again. This time around, the difficulty curve feels much smoother and way more natural. There were never any massive level jumps or anything. I never really felt pressured to grind outside of a very slim number of occasions. I just played the game and I progressed with natural ease. Now I will say the biggest overall spike in OT1 was around the mid-30s. In Octopath 2, this happens a lot earlier. I found myself struggling the most often between the late teens and mid-20s in this game. Now the reason for this is because there is a massive change-up between the first and second chapters. And since you don't have access to the really good stuff this early on, it can get a bit tougher. But it's not ball-bustingly tough. I think it's a pretty decent increase. And the levels seem to much more accurately reflect chapter difficulties this time, I feel. But what was the massive change-up? Well, this is where I throw the devs a bone. Individual first chapters. In the first game, every chapter 1 beyond your first character turned into a cakewalk because you fought bosses that were designed to be soloed. But by the fourth character, you were bringing a whole crew to. Now, every single starter chapter is either you actually starting the game with your first character, which does matter later on, or it's you meeting someone and getting a flashback chapter to learn their tale and why they want to join you, which means the difficulty of each starting chapter is maintained and the story feels more natural. You don't just have Casti waiting for you in Candlebrine per se. She's already begun her journey and wants to join you on your travels so she can continue her quest as well. This single tiny decision fixes so many things for me, and I think it was an excellent choice. However, as good as the majority of the game is when it comes to difficulty, the late game kind of becomes a coin flip. Depending on how well you prep, how well you build your team, and of course how good you are at the game, late game OT2 can turn into a bit of a snowball fest, to the point that bosses start falling over extremely fast and it starts turning into a joke. Actually, for my chat, it did turn into a joke. The average Hikari main experience. But this isn't just true of Hikari mains. Your starting character is always going to end up a bit stronger than the rest of the party for a while, since they have to stay in there, so they're obviously going to get overleveled and become rather powerful. The bigger problem is that as long as you're not intentionally throwing boss fights to see what they're capable of and what mechanics they have, you will end up speedrunning through them. Step Ahead can grant you an entire turn of setup in advance, maybe even 2 essentially if your whole team outspeeds the boss on the second turn. Deal More Damage will let you 1 or 2 shot bosses with great consistency, and even if you don't equip either of these, there's just so many good skills in this game that you will probably find a way to make your team very safe. I'm not saying that Octopath 2's endgame is easy by any means. I think it's just a game that is easy to break, an argument I've made before about Bravely Default 2. In its essence, I think that the things late game enemies can do are very strong, but with even a modicum of min-maxing, you can easily overwhelm most of them. Like, what the hell is a boss supposed to do if you have a full team of people with Step Ahead, and then you have Agnia use Windy Refrain to make sure you all act first on the next turn too? The answer is nothing. And the reason that I find this a bit unfortunate is because Octopath has some of the most creative enemy attacks and mechanics of any RPGs out there. A cowardly boss near death that tosses a bunch of money at you so you'll leave them alone? Hilarious. A dog that summons new minions to the fight by digging up bones which turn out to be skeletons? Love it. But generally speaking, you don't normally want to see all of a boss's moves, because then you're going to get wiped. And because of how easy it is to make a very strong team, you get to the point that you can miss out on these cool mechanics. Without spoiling anything, Throne's final boss has many cool abilities, and is one of the most unique bosses I've ever seen. Seen being the key word here, as the boss itself has so little HP that even when I was taking it intentionally slow at chat's request, I still didn't even get to see half of what the boss was capable of. So I had to go watch a video on it later. Now, normally I would say that in this case, you should tune your team back and take it easy, but this is where the snowballing comment kind of turns its other cheek. See, bosses also have snowbally habits, so if they start dominating the fight, it can be really hard to take back control of the fight, which means you have to take some of the more powerful stuff into fight so that you don't get rolled and have a chance of winning. So essentially, the endgame just turns into who can out-snowball the other, and it's a little sad. My recommendation is that if you want to see what bosses are capable of, go in on your first attempt with no ego and just let it kill you. See what kinds of cool stuff it can do, and then if you want to win, go full ham on it on the second attempt. Outside of that though, it is a good thing that the bosses are actually scary if you don't plan accordingly, and the overall difficulty is very satisfying. I'm going to begin this section with a statement, and I say it with full sincerity. I don't think Octopath Traveler 2 was soundtrack of the year for 2023. I don't think it's one of the best soundtracks in the last few years. I believe it is one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time. I'm not over-exaggerating or being hyperbolic. I am of the genuine belief that this is one of the absolute finest collections of music ever made, and that Yasunori Nishiki has crafted an actual masterpiece. That word is thrown around a lot, yes, but I truly think it is the only term that accurately reflects just how immaculate it is. And that's coming from someone who has been advocating the Bravely Default series for about 8 years now, which is renowned for its OST. I know it's bound to become a meme at this point that if a game has good music, I'll end up playing it, but I can't help it. And my dearest hope with this review, if nothing else, is that more people will recognize this soundtrack's brilliance, if not the entire game. In fact, the moment I had finished the game, I went online and ordered the physical soundtrack. There was no chance in hell that I could not own such an enthralling piece of art. This is probably going to be one of the longest parts of the video, and for very good reason. I have a lot to say about the music of OT2 because it's a soundtrack that encapsulates so many different feelings in equally perfect ways. So I think the only way I can actually get through this section is if I talk at length about some specific tracks that have stood out to me among the rest, and there's nowhere else I'd rather start with than the main theme. Yasunori's reimagining of the main Octopath theme perfectly embodies the words, "Welcome home." We open into this beautiful vocalist quietly serenading us, but their intention isn't to lull us to sleep. Instead, it's more akin to, "Hey, it's time to wake up now, come on." And once your eyes finally open, the beat kicks in. The drums call out, bringing you back, and the flutes race as you begin to realize you're home. Octopath has returned. The main flute motif begins, bringing back those good memories you had with the previous game, and now it's time for a new adventure. You wonder what kinds of people you're going to meet, what foes will stand in your way. But then we take a shift. The song flattens out, a drum appears, the strings chug along, the piano hits some new notes. Things are a bit different now, things are new. And just before it gets too unfamiliar, you're brought right back home, a smile forming as the familiar tune returns once more. It's saying, no, don't fear. This is still Octopath, but it's something new for you to enjoy. Come journey with us once again. As the song continues, it widens out again, offering your imagination the wide open world of Celestia and all the new places you'll discover. Mountains, plains, deserts, and jungles alike. Across rivers and seas you'll go. The background vocals kick back in, this endless cycle of returning, gradually getting bigger and bigger as your excitement rises for this big adventure. The song is louder, stronger than its predecessor, a very accurate signifier of things to come. And as we reach the finale, where the first game's theme culminates in just the strings on top, 2 doubles up on the strings with hard-hitting drums at its side. The thrill is at its peak, and it is now time to set out on a new path. It's time to see where your journey will take you in Octopath Traveler 2. That was all one song, just as a reminder. Now, I don't plan to be that long on every song in this discussion, just to be clear, but I've still got more tracks I want to gush about, so let's move right along to what was perhaps one of the most delightfully unexpected tunes in the game. A sensational city, or as most would recognize it, the New Delsta theme, was the absolute last type of song I thought I'd hear in Octopath. And yet here we are. This jazzy, upbeat jingle never fails to make my head bop along any time I enter a city that has the song playing. It's also a fun inclusion that fits this growing world, as there are multiple towns that are beginning to enter the early ages of an industrial era. This kind of song would make sense for those busy urban hubs. There's also very chill and happy tunes like Tropu Hopu's theme. I mentioned this one earlier in passing, but man, every time I hear that song, I close my eyes and just imagine myself on the beach with a tall drink in hand and the sun shining down upon me. It absolutely encapsulates the island getaway mood and is an immediate vibe. And if you want something more relaxing, try the Crestlands theme, especially its nighttime variant. Yes, you heard right, almost every location song in this game, be it in the open world or a populated area, has 2 versions of its music. Just another amazing signature move of Yasunori, putting in that extra effort where it was never asked, but happily accepted. All of the nighttime tracks are a calmer, quieter version of their day variants and feature a stunning female vocalist that will lull you into utter relaxation. Of course, in contrast, we have Abandoned City, a horrifically simple and creepy track that is extremely open and just gives off all the wrong vibes. I'm going to avoid talking about or showing any footage of this place, but suffice to say, anytime I have to go to that shithole, I am overwhelmed by a sense of impending dread. Every second there, I'm constantly saying to myself, yeah, nah, fuck this place ain't right, which it isn't. I'll definitely be talking more about where this song comes from later in the review. I have a bit to say. And, Dark Knight. Holy fuck. But enough of that. You all want to know about the combat themes. Well, my friends, I am delighted to inform you, they all fuck more than I do. But seriously, how does Yasunori keep cooking with all these sick battle themes? Where does he keep getting them? I thought surely he must have started to run low after OT1 and COTC, right? Not a chance. We get 3 new banger main combat themes, funny rare enemy theme that, by some miracle of fate, would always end up playing every time I entered a new tier zone that normally would be my first time getting to hear the next new battle theme, 2 normal boss themes, a final chapter boss theme, and a unique variant of it for each character that incorporates their specific leitmotif. Like, this is beyond insane, right? Oh, and how could I forget? Of those 2 normal chapter boss themes, there's Critical Clash 2.
Let's go!
Every single fucking time those horns and drums kick in at the start, it is go time. I've never been spurred to action so quickly by a song before, and this one comes out swinging. The main tune with the horns afterwards, the underlying bass following along, leading to a duet with the flutes makes for such a beautiful earworm that will actively prevent you from raging just because of how amazing the song is. The song screams, stand up and fight, and not a second will go by that it doesn't make you feel that way, battling until the very end. And the best part, you won't have to wait until the mid-game to hear it. Critical Clash 1 and 2 are used interchangeably throughout the entire game, so you'll get to hear CC2 as early as your very first chapter possibly. Easily one of the best normal boss themes I've heard in any game.
Myself. Oh, Critical Clash 2! I've heard this one.
Axe attack.
But wait, that's not all. There's also the wonderfully fitting sea battle theme. Yes, you heard me right. Remember that big boat I mentioned earlier that you can go sailing around the high seas on? Did you really think that there wouldn't be more monsters out there? The ocean is not meant for man, but with this song backing you, your team will be able to beat down any giant fish that wants to tackle with them. And then you've got the bonus boss theme, Fierce Confrontation. Look, I'm going to be real here for a moment. The first time I heard this track, I nearly shit myself and thought I walked into something I was absolutely not prepared for. It turned out to be a cakewalk in the end, but not before getting past the dread-inducing opener that leads into a dark rock track that screams, "Bad things stand before you, stand your ground." I think Impending Peril would be an equally accurate name for this track.
So far, but it has me worried.
Bring it on,
Ooh,
friend.
this is a bop. I like this.
It's my turn now.
And of course, there's the final boss themes, but I'll save those for the finale, where they belong. Naturally, there are just as many songs to soothe as there are songs to invigorate. Unshakable Resolve manages to walk this line with fierce determination, managing to be incredibly inspiring and sad in equal measure. The song only plays a handful of times, and yet every use of it was beyond fitting. In the more sad category, we move on to At Your Back, a track that starts to get the waterworks going in me every time I hear it. It is this very beautifully sad piece that manages to still hang on to hope and be mildly joyful while evoking tears with ease. It begins with this nice piano and guitar ballad, and it's pretty nice for a while. But then that string section kicks in, I struggle not to choke up, and my heart just goes... Yeah, it's strong stuff. And the funny thing is, this song is used for really sad scenes and really encouraging scenes, and it's equally effective in both. Kinda crazy. Now before I talk about the last few songs, I need to give a little context about myself. You see, I grew up on the east coast of Canada, and I've been raised around a lot of music with fiddles and bagpipes and accordions and so on. Generally stuff that is descended from Scottish or Irish or Gaelic or Celtic or whatever heritage, I don't know. So when I got to Wellgrove for Partitio's third chapter and heard A Verdant Wind Blows for the first time, I was completely taken aback. It was like I'd been ripped back to my childhood and was just caught up in the song's warm embrace. It makes me want to go outside on a nice summer day and just enjoy a stroll across town. Yasunori did an unbelievable job with capturing the essence of that kind of music, and there are two last songs I want to discuss that exemplify this even more. Of course, those of you who have played the game already know where I'm going with this, but Agnea the Dancer and the Song of Hope are actual magic. Like, actual existing examples of magic in the real world. Because every time I hear them, they put a spell on me that never fails to either make me smile or inspire me to press on. I'll save Song of Hope for later in Agnea's discussion, but I need to talk about Agnea's theme now. Not only is it just a stunning track on its own, just from the sound and joy it gives to all lucky enough to hear it, but it works as a character-telling piece too. The one thought I cannot get out of my head when hearing Agnia's theme is to join in the dance. Exactly what she would want. It starts off with that fiddle and drum, with the quiet plucking of an acoustic guitar in the back, all of them taking the lead and calling out for others to join. And then there's an accordion. It joins the dance, elevating the song further, and soon a flute finds its way into the circle. The instruments combine their sounds and become one triumphant harmony of joy. I've heard that Agnia was Yasunori's favorite character to write music for, and it absolutely shows in her themes. But that level of love is not only shown here, it's shown in every character theme, all their variations, in the way that every song transitions perfectly into the next, continuing on the flow of hype into thrill that OT1 had with its own music, in the main theme that welcomes us home, in the fact that Yasunori made a day and night version of every single location track in the game, with the absolutely majestic female vocalist on those nighttime variants, and the boasting, excited tone of the daytime melodies. These are the reasons I believe this is one of the finest video game scores to ever exist, and I hope that more people will come to appreciate the sheer amount of effort, skill, and passion that Yasunori Nishiki puts into his work. Music is meant to uplift the story, to elevate it beyond a simple event and give it a deeper sense of emotion. And Yasunori has managed to craft something that is so magnificent, it brings out emotions from within me more than any other piece of media has managed to do prior, and far more than I ever expected. I still adore Bravely with all my heart, but Octopath 2 was the one that managed to open that heart up time and again, giving me so much love and sorrow and ferocity to experience without end. In fact, it was the soundtrack that initially made me consider playing this game in the first place. After having such a rocky experience with Octopath 1, I wasn't particularly ecstatic about the idea of spending another 80 hours on a game I may not like. But the music changed my mind about that, and now the only regret I have is that I didn't play sooner, so I could have basked in this glorious symphony on the daily for another year of my life. With the best part of the game out of the way, I suppose we could jump into what I have the biggest problems with. Oh yes, we returned to something I critiqued the last time as well. But again, I want to be more specific than just say voice acting bad. I don't think the voice actors themselves did a bad job. In fact, I quite like a lot of the voices in this game. I think they're really fitting and do the characters justice more often than not. Especially with some specific lines that come later. Whew, Throne, if you know, you know. And Casti! I was listening to some more voice lines while working on this script, and when I got to Casti's combat lines,
I am a fortress, my gates barred.
I'm playing Warrior Casti next time because holy shit, Sarah Weidenheft. She went so hard on these lines. There are some really potent voice performances that I can't really get into without spoiling, so you'll just have to trust me on that front. Those discussions will be in the character sections, trust. But all of the English dub main cast did an exceptional job on all of their characters, and almost every single villain or side character was just as well done. When I say I have a problem with the voicing, it's in two other categories: direction and mixing. Once more, I feel that some of the cast didn't get the best direction in their deliveries, so while they sound good and right for the character, the way they speak some lines just doesn't quite work. It comes off as clunky or unnatural. Granted, again, this is not a general case thing. The voice acting overall is a lot better than the first games, I believe. The bigger issue of the two here is the mixing, though. Oh hey, here's a cool new character model in Partitio's story. I wonder what her deal is.
Oh my, I guess these aren't in vogue out in the West.
I'm not sure who was behind the audio mixing on this one, but Did they even compare Ori's voice line volume to the other characters? It genuinely hurt my ears initially when she started speaking. And again, not the voice actor's fault there, it's just that whoever should have checked the audio levels could have turned her down a notch to match the rest of the crew. Just because she's a loudmouth in game doesn't mean she has my permission to blow out my eardrums. That's reserved for the soundtrack. And of course, this one swings both ways. A returning issue I had in OT1 as well, sometimes the voice lines are way too quiet. I even adjusted my audio right off the bat with this game, giving voice lines precedence over music, and there are still parts where it would be near impossible to make out what someone is mumblecoring if they didn't have a speech bubble.
That is why I made you my closest friend. You were the only one who understood.
But, and I will grant the game this, at least this time they made up their mind on whether a cutscene is voice acted or not. Most of the game is fully voiced, and it's just some side quests and dialogues are left muted instead of doing half and half like the first game. I did say I had 2 problems for this segment, so let's talk about translation. Now, I'm not one of those piss babies that complain about censoring in translation or whatever. They nerfed her titties kind of shit. I don't really care. As long as it doesn't affect the story or the character of the character or whatever, it's fine in my books. For example, I actually like that they toned down the repeated joke about Agnia's peaches for the English version, because I could honestly have seen myself getting tired of that bit pretty quickly. The moments it appeared in English were funny because they weren't constantly being beaten over my head, so good call there. My real problem is with some of the text translations. Yes, I know. Translations being bad is a common thing that all JRPGs have had to deal with, but in this case, it actually impeded me a number of times. Some of the descriptions on how abilities work in Octopath 2 are rough at best and just completely wrong for others. One of the biggest atrocities is the warrior skill Enervating Blade. Nullify all positive status effects on a single foe, then unleash a sword attack. The more status effects you nullify, the more potent the attack. This is exactly what the skill reads as in-game. I have not changed a single word of the description. So, how does this ability work? Does it A, remove all positive status effects on a targeted enemy, then does a powerful attack that gets stronger based on the number of effects you removed, or B, you lose all of your buffs and then do an attack that increases in power with the more buffs you lost? If your answer was A, because you read the description like a normal human being, you are wrong. Enervating Blade does not remove buffs on an enemy, it removes buffs on your warrior that is using it, and greatly empowers the attack the more buffs you have. Or had, I suppose. Let's take Throne's EX skill Veil of Darkness as another example. It reads, deal dark base damage to all foes and dodge 1 physical attack with a 100% success rate. Again, that is the exact writing of the description. So what do you think it does? Here's my interpretation. You do dark damage to all enemies, and then you essentially get a stack of sidestep that lets Throne dodge the next physical attack coming at her. Nope. In fact, this is the opposite case where the skill is better than how it's described. It does the dark damage, but then applies a debuff to each enemy hit that makes them guaranteed to miss their next physical attack. So it's not one stack of sidestep, it's a 100% chance to miss from every enemy on the field, making this ability so much better, even if you don't build Throne for elemental damage. These are just 2 examples that came to mind, but I'm kind of confused and almost impressed with how off some of them are. Like, I get that all the different departments are probably busy and translators are just doing their job, but maybe if you're translating abilities and how things work in the game, you should test the ability and see if it lines up with what the words say. I know that's more work, but double checking couldn't hurt.
Hey, Editing Red here. So at some point between me finishing Octopath 2 and me editing this part of the video, both of the descriptions for Enervating / get it right this time, and Veil of Darkness have been adjusted to more accurately reflect what they do. I'm very happy to see that these were patched. That's great to hear. So these 2 arguments are nearly moot. That said, I still would like to see that these things just don't happen at all, if possible, through extra double checking and such. It was still an error, but I can proudly say that it's an error they have also resolved.
One of the biggest and most problematic examples, that I won't specify the situation it's about to avoid spoilers, is where a journal entry states that a character who you most definitely watch die is actually alive. The Japanese version of this entry makes no note of this character surviving their ordeal, so this is either some random addition thrown in that doesn't actually change anything, or it is one of the most head-scratching mistranslations in the entire game to mistake a person who died as still being alive. I should conclude with this reminder. These are not indicative points of the majority of the translations or voice acting in Octopath 2. Again, most of the time it is ranging from perfectly fine to exceptional, and the translations are perfectly serviceable as well. But the few mistakes that are made in this category, they are there, so I figured it was only right to critique them as such. But seriously, when I'm saying that the biggest problem I had with this game was translations, something that almost certainly wasn't an issue in the Japanese release, that just goes to show how high quality this game is overall. Honestly, I kinda wish I understood Japanese better so I could really experience and appreciate the game in its original language. Now, this section is going to be split into 2 parts, or 10 if you count the other sections individually. Basically, I'm going to talk about the story and characters from a non-spoiler perspective first, and then I'm going to discuss each character and their plots separately with full spoilers, and then I'll get into the game's finale with spoilers as well. First off, if you played the original Octopath and you were burned by the story, or didn't like that the characters didn't interact with each other during the chapters, let me tell you, as someone who was heavily disappointed by the story elements in that game, Octopath 2 is a complete reversal on that. Yes, the story in 2 is good. Like, far more solid and entertaining than what OT1 had to offer. The characters' stories range from okay to legendary, so when the worst option is just an okay and not a fucking terrible, that's already a good sign. I don't believe any of the stories are anywhere near as weak as some of the journeys from the first game, and it just kinda comes down to what you personally enjoy or what you're in the mood for. If you want a really gritty, edgy story, pick Throne. If you want crippling depression, go for Casti. It's worth it. And if you need to feel good after Casti's story, Egnia or Partitio will do the trick. The writers also learned 2 very awesome lessons. Not to force stories to connect to the background lore that don't need it, and that you can completely mess with chapter formatting. While the first one is nice because it lets the stories that aren't that connected flourish and do their own thing better, the second one was one of my absolute favorite parts of the entire game. OT1 had a very terrible habit of almost every single chapter having the exact same format. But in 2, well, outside of the intro chapters being all the same, because you kind of have to if you're letting the players start with anyone, which is fine, chapter formatting goes right out the window, and I love it. Some chapters have that typical town dungeon boss format. Then you've got others that have no dungeon and just a boss or 2. Or multiple if it's Akari's tournament arc. Can't go without one of those, it's just the law. Some chapters, interestingly, have a dungeon, but no boss. And some chapters have neither. Yep, you heard me. Some chapters are purely meant for storytelling and nothing else. And I am beyond grateful to the writers for actually doing that. To sit down and say, nah, we don't need to force a random encounter to pop out here and confront the traveler. Let's just let their story play out. It's so good. It's peak. I was madly in love with how they handled chapter formatting here. And speaking of chapter formatting, this time we were introduced to non-linear progression. Sort of. Some characters have divergent chapters that allow the player to choose the order they continue the story in, which I thought was really nice. So, as an example, Casti gets 2 hints about where she could learn more about her past. Now you get to decide which one she investigates first. Again, breaking things up to add some flair, really great decision from the devs and writers. While the individual stories still don't truly have the characters crossover, Octopath 2 does a much better job at building party cohesion in a number of ways. The most obvious one is through cross paths, unique chapter events where 2 of the main characters pair up and have a short adventure together. As in, actually interacting and working towards the same goal in a little side quest. The cross paths are really nice and expand upon the overarching plot in a few places. I had a great time with them overall. There are other things that aid in making the party actually feel like a group too, like the extensive commentary voice lines in combat. Every single character has lines where they will praise or cry out for the last person who acted if they did something big or near death.
You're finished.
You're too kind, Oswald.
The instant I heard this happen for the first time, I was taken aback. Finally, the party actually seemed to care about one another. They were looking out for each other, and it was gloriously refreshing compared to the popsicle stick rigidity of OT1's crew. Of course, we still have the party banters, which are always tons of fun, and really send home the party dynamics and interactions a lot harder. And this time, if you miss an interaction because you didn't have the right party members together at the right time in a chapter, no worries. All party banters, missed or not, become available in the journal after you finish a chapter. Oh, and of course, this game's finale does finally have all 8 travelers work together as one unit to stop, well, whatever is happening there. Again, finale discussions later. But I promise, if you didn't enjoy having to find some random side quests in OT1 to even access the game's true final boss, you'll be relieved to hear that OT2's finale is right out in the open. I mean, you have to meet certain chapter completion requirements, but just playing through the whole game normally will lead you to the ending, and you'll get exactly what you were wanting out of OT1's ending this time. The build up to the finale is also really well done. Lots of very subtle things that you don't really notice the first time through unless you're really paying attention. Or you get crazy stuff like the Dark Knight encounters that you'll come across randomly throughout the playthrough, something that also nearly made me shit myself the first time I ran into it and instilled pure dread every time after. And all of these things combined do a thoroughly effective job at making you curious about what's really going on. Now, this may sound a bit contradictory to everything I just said, but I also enjoyed how much more separated in a way each story was this time. As I stated earlier, this is still an anthology, so the stories do not intertwine while you're doing them, even when party cohesion is much stronger than it's ever been. But there's 2 reasons I don't mind this in 2 compared to my disdain for it in 1. The first reason is that each character feels like they own their story much more. I feel that the build-up and execution of the stories in this entry are a lot more specific to each character, and that they really dominate the events of their stories a lot better than in Octopath 1. This is a weird one to explain, so I'll try to offer an example. When comparing characters like Partitio and Tressa, Tressa's journey feels a lot looser, not so rigidly defined to her as a person. She just kinda does her thing as a fledgling merchant and moves along. Whereas with Partitio, while he's also traveling around doing merchant things, his story has a goal, it has a line and it follows it. Save his town from poverty and make the world a better place through commerce. And it just wouldn't feel right if anyone else from the main party was butting in on his narrative in a major way. His character also feels more defined and memorable in comparison. Same goes for the rest of the cast. The writers also made the very smart choice to have every first chapter be a solo chapter, whether you are picking your first person or bringing someone new aboard. I already discussed this during the difficulty section, but I wanted to reiterate it here just because of how much of a good effect this has on the plot. When you meet someone after getting your first chapter, you're meeting them after that intro chapter has happened, chronologically. So the characters, again, feel like they're owning their stories much more, instead of just waiting around for you to arrive so that they can begin their journeys. The other reason is much easier to explain. While the stories are indeed still separate, their effects on the world are not. I said before that Celestia feels like a much stronger world than Orstera, and that is most true here. The things that happen in each story genuinely feels like they push the world forward and have an effect on people outside of the main cast for the vast majority of stories. Be it Hikari's quest to reclaim the throne and put an end to his nation's bloodshed, something they've been known for across Hinoeuma for many years now, or Partitio's nose leading him around the world to find savvy new businesses to invest in and revolutionize the world with their services or inventions. Each character leaves their mark on Celestia. It isn't just a backdrop. The world is influenced by their actions. And plus, there are some side characters that do have short crossover appearances between stories, so again, the world actually feels interconnected that way. And of course, there's the finale that actually ties everything together this time. Overall, if you wanted to like Octopath Traveler's story but couldn't find yourself clicking with it or just didn't enjoy it, try OT2. It's better in pretty much every single facet, and you're going to have a much more enjoyable time with this cast and their plights. And if you want my personal favorites without saying why, I think my favorite character is a three-way tie between Casti, Hikari, and Oswald. I think my favorite story is probably one of those three, though I believe Casti is the objectively best one if I had to pick. Agnia and Partitio's plots are really nice feel-good stories that were wonderful to go through. Ochette is a fun character with an alright plot. Temenos is an S+ character for an overall B- story. And Throne's plot gets extraordinarily dark despite being overall a tad bland, but has some extremely powerful moments in my opinion. And the finale is fantastic. But now, with all that non-spoiler stuff out of the way, it's time. From here on out, it's going to be nothing but full story discussion until the conclusion of the video, so skip to that now if you do not want to have these wonderful tales ruined for you. And to those sticking around, sit tight. We've got a lot to discuss, so let's get started. As I stated before, I started off with Hikari. It's a habit, I just love warriors. But despite being blown away by his story as an intro, instead I figured we should go over each traveler the proper way. So let's jump right in with... It's funny that I began my journey with the last person in the Octopath order, and that the last person I started with was the first. Either way, Ochette had a surprisingly delightful opening, and kept that positivity flowing throughout her entire story. I don't think it was necessarily the most interesting or deep overall. I mean, if I wanted to be cynical, her story is, I'm gonna go catch 3 legendary Pokemon and stop Ganon Bloodmoon. For those not aware of her plot, Ochette is a beastling on the island of Totohaha who must bring 3 creatures of legend from the outside world back to her home in order to protect it from a calamity known as the Night of the Crimson Moon. See what I mean? There were several aspects of her story that kept it in good standing for me. The first one was Ochette herself. I think in most other circumstances, I'd get pretty annoyed with a character like this, the constantly cutesy, innocent, and annoying archetype, but Ochette manages to sidestep this. Because while, yes, she is generally very innocent and just cares about eating jerky 90% of the time, that other 10% is what hit it home for me. I like seeing her howl and laugh and constantly be hungry, but when shit gets real, Ochette steps up to meet that challenge head on. Full respect for that. Her very first chapter, she just instinctually decides to fight the monster attacking her village, and immediately I was in love when she shouted,
Come on! You wanna fight? Here I am!
And extending off of that was when I realized what her story was really about. A beastling coming to understand and recognize the concept of love. Throughout her story, she is being asked, why do you fight? And her usual answer is, I don't know, I just like meat. But as the story reaches its finale, Ochette is finally able to acknowledge her love for her people and home, and decides, this is why I fight. This probably comes off as kind of kiddie pool level deep, but I think the thing that disguises Ochette's actual level of emotional intelligence is the fact that she is the only beastling capable of complete language. Shirludo is probably the next closest. I would never say that Ochette is stupid, but her speaking normally masks the fact to us, the players, that she is still a beastling at the end of the day, who is only really concerned with finding her next meal and making it tomorrow, which is perfectly fine. But it's this journey where we get to witness her actually come to understand herself, to feel these things, and finally put a name to the reason that makes her stand up and fight. And once I realized this, that she had found and understood the reason she wanted to protect her home rather than just acting out on instinct, it made me appreciate Ochette's story in a whole new light.
Master Juva, I'm going to protect Totohaha. And that means I'm going to fight!
Her theme really shows this argument in the simplest way, once again showing Yasunori's brilliance in being able to capture a character in song perfectly. It begins with this very slow, solemn tone that I was not expecting to hear for this character, representing the call to responsibility. I actually got goosebumps hearing it for the first time, and by that point I was totally on board with Ochette's character. And then eventually, that drum beat and flute kick in, Ochette answering the call in her own way. She's accepting that responsibility to protect the people she loves. And at the same time, she's embarking on a great big adventure filled with excitement and danger alike, and she's ready to take on the world. Another part that really made Ochette's story stand out was just how dynamic it was compared to the others. At the very beginning, you get to choose between a physical damage pet and an elemental damage pet. I went with the latter, Mahina. This choice comes back all the way at the end, where it determines which version of the final boss you get to fight, and it is heart-wrenching to hear the other voice actor you could have had at your side all along, now in agony and calling out for oblivion as it becomes more and more deformed with each phase of the fight. It is so miserable, but in a good way. And then the boss fight itself is unique for every person that takes it on, because the boss gains abilities based on the specific characters you take in. And then getting to unlock Max Boost Cataracta and Mahina in the same fight? It was glorious. And of course, Ochette has the most non-linear progression of all, which makes sense. There's not really any reason that Ochette should find these creatures of legend in any particular order. So it's only fair that the free-spirited young beastling get to travel this cool new world however she pleases, and get to meet all sorts of people in the process. Also, having Actus chapter be this short dungeon and no boss jaunt was really refreshing for the early game. It was a really good way to mix up the story that I was not expecting. I think the overall plot, again, is a little bit basic, and it's unfortunate that the Dark Hunter Petrichor doesn't make that much of an appearance, even though I know why. And lastly, I want to wrap up my enjoyment of Ochette with a massive praise for Susie Young. She did so well with this character, perfectly encapsulating those feelings of equal parts youthful glee and guardian of her people. It was such a fun performance, and every time Ochette was on screen, it was a joy to see. But no more sad Ochette. I can't take another heart drop after seeing sad Ochette sprite. Please, I beg you. Ochette's Hunter kit felt alright to use, although some of the stuff I considered strong in OT1 now feels a lot weaker in comparison. But in place of that, I found a new love: capturing. I barely made use of Hanet's capture mechanic because it felt really frustrating to even try and capture creatures with, and even if you did, you only got a limited number of uses out of them. In contrast, while they might not hit the same peaks as some of OT1's creatures could, Ochette's captures are still very strong, way easier to obtain, and they stick around. You can only hold so many creatures now, but when you let one go, you at least get something out of them with the food mechanic that ties in perfectly with the hunter. Ochette's 3-way latent power felt very useful. Each attack had its right time and place in a fight, and I thought it was decent enough. Path actions, though, I think I used Ochette the absolute least in this department. Befriend is alright, but you need specific foods to guide them, which got a little annoying, and also I don't really use summons in fights, so it didn't mean a lot to me personally. But Provoke? I completely forgot that this existed 9 times out of 10. If I needed to knock someone down, I would just challenge with Hikari or ambush with Throne. Provoke was the last thing on my mind. But, to end off on a positive note, Ochette has some wild EX skills. Indomitable Beast was pretty good, giving her a massive boost to damage, evasion, and speed for a long time. But Provoke Beasts? This was insane. This might have grounds for best EX skill in the whole game. When you normally provoke with Ochette, you just get to use one beast at different power levels based on the boost. But even though you can't summon the creatures of legend with this skill, Provoke Beasts at max boost let you summon 6 creatures in one turn. That is beyond broken, especially once you start getting creatures like the Chubby Kate that you can then spam 6 times, an enemy type that when encountered will make you check your inventory beyond your grapes and plums for the first time in hours. Just wait a second, now don't you run, I could have sworn, hey, don't you run on me! Where's that fucking soul? Stop! Wait, Hikari, no!
Let's try it.
Anyways, Provoke Beast is like triple S+ tier good. The skill is nuts, and it was always a good time having her in the party to do so. Just keep bringing joy and jerky to those around you, Ochette. Gods knows we need the feel-good stories in between some of these other ones.
If anyone can create a cure, it's you. It's up to you now.
Casti destroyed me. I'm not the biggest crier out there. I've been drawn close to tears by only a very small handful of games before this. The finale of 358 Days Over 2 in the battle against Shion, and Bravely Default 2 when I reached a certain boss and heard a beautiful leitmotif from 8 years prior take over. The second that I recognized it, my eyes couldn't help but well up. The only piece of media that was successful in actually making me bawl my eyes out was the anime Clannad, which, if you know, you know. But now, I have to add Octopath 2 to the list because no other game has affected me on such a deep level before, and most of those tears were because of Casti. There's a lot I could say about Casti. Hell, I could make a standalone video to talk about this amazing character and her journey, and I still might, even if it's a lot of repeat from this one, but I'll repeat it a million times if I must. Casti is one of the most compelling, tragic characters I've ever encountered in media. This narrative resonated so profoundly with me. I was breaking out into tears on stream, the last place on Earth I'd want to be vulnerable on, in front of an anonymous public. It's not like I don't like you guys, it's just embarrassing is all. Anyways, I think if you ask me who has the best story objectively, I have to pick her. The initial premise is nothing particularly new. A young woman awakens in an unfamiliar place with no memory of who she is, the only clues being her name, a blood-stained journal, and her satchel of apothecary implements. From this most basic of amnesiac plots, we follow Casti in her struggle to reclaim who she once was, and understand what happened to cause her memory loss in the first place, and with each chapter, the story only gets sadder. But the amazing thing is, at no point do I pity Casti. I feel bad for her situation and what happened, sure, but as a person, immense respect. Casti is the definition of strength in adversity, and this is shown in both audio departments. Her theme is absolutely one of my favorites amongst the cast, and for good reason. She gets 4 different variants throughout the game, but her normal theme and In Pursuit variant are the 2 I want to bring up most. Her basic theme is this somber lullaby, gently panging on a sad xylophone before being ever so slightly uplifted by an even sadder flute. There's not a lot of variance in her theme, and that's okay. It's almost like a eulogy, as though Casti is in perpetual mourning for the people she has lost. And then in stark contrast, we have the In Pursuit version, a thunderous shout telling all that are near to get behind me. A choir of horns replace that quiet flute. A bell sounds rhythmically, and you feel as though, listening to this song, you can stand against the very storm itself. You are resolute. You are Casti Florins. And in terms of voicing this unstoppable apothecary, Sarah Wiedenheft absolutely knocked it out of the park on this performance. There is so much talent on display in how she can show both compassion and force in multitudes and yet still be the same character. Hell, you even get to see both at once on occasions. Sarah really poured her soul into this role, and it shows. It is genuinely impressive how, on just the turn of a dime, she can go from this extremely soft and motherly intonation to the most threatening and powerful individual in Celestia. She'll heal your wounds one moment, and the next, she's screaming,
With these hands!
and believe me, she's got hands. The Apothecary kit feels like the most well-rounded of all 8 basic jobs. It can heal and revive with the same skill now, heal over time, has Axe AoE, poison, and can deal decent damage all around. But with Casti behind the wheel, it goes from pretty good to godly. Her signature Concoct ability is borderline unmatched by anything else in the game, except for those fucking Kates I talked about 5 minutes ago. But even the Kates are random. With Casti on a max boost Concoct, you can heal 2000 HP, 200 MP, and give 2 BP to every member of your team. And if her latent power is active, you don't consume a single component in the process. Need to burn through 5 of a boss's shields but don't have enough hits from any of your mages? Max boost Casti and concoct a torrent of wind, dark, and light damage to hit the enemy up to 5 times instead. Or spam a bunch of debuffing agents at your foe so you and your team can follow up with some monstrous damage. Concoct is an insanely powerful perk that I adored using this time. In OT1, I didn't enjoy it as much as I didn't enjoy the lack of clarity in what I was doing until the concoction was finished. But with Casti, you can see the exact effects your potion will have as you are crafting it. And I'm not really sure how it happened this time and not with Alphen, but this game's concoct just clicked the right way and triggered my personal love of chemistry, so it felt satisfying to use. But that's not where Casti's exclusive powers end. Both of her EX skills are fantastic as well. Remedy is obtained only after completing her story, but has the ability to grant up to 9 random positive effects to a random ally at max boost, and an already hefty 3 effects at base. And these buffs can be divine skill effects too. But of course, there's also the other skill, the one everyone knows and loves, the skill that lets Casti really show off these hands. Drastic Measures. An unbelievably strong attack that increases its damage with the number of debuffs on the enemy in exchange for removing said debuffs after contact. But usually, if you're hitting this hard, they're probably not getting back up afterwards, let's be real here. Of course, nearly everyone can agree that Casti probably has the best story out of all the Travelers. It is a modern masterpiece in tragedy, ruinously effective and sublime in delivery. Normally when you have an amnesiac plot, you have one of 3 routes it takes. Either it brings a person back to normalcy and happiness, reveals a secret self of great power and ability, or it reveals nothing but woe. Casti falls strongly into the 3rd category, which creates this beautiful tragedy where, as Casti succeeds, the pain flows back more and more, and yet she doesn't falter. Not once. We start off with this incredible mystery of who is Casti, and as she arrives on the mainland in Cannelbrine, we experience a race to discover this town from Pestilence, this town that loathes her for being part of some group called Heirs Apothecaries, a group of healers that supposedly kills entire towns. It's a solid opening chapter that exemplifies Casti's character, has a serious issue for an apothecary to deal with that culminates in what is probably the hardest chapter 1 boss of them all, and introduces its mysteries perfectly while also answering just enough to be rewarding. If this were Octopath 1, I would have expected the reveal of who Malaya was to Casti to come like at least another chapter later. But nope, better writing. We reveal her as another of Ayers' apothecaries and show that she was the person who pushed Casti out to sea. Plus, you get that super sick glitch animation whenever Casti remembers something based on her Inquire skill. Very cool stuff. From there, we immediately jump into non-linear chapters as Casti wanders to 2 towns mentioned in her blood-addled journal to learn more. And I'll say it now, Winterbloom arc nearly broke me at the end. It was a really sweet contrast to the first chapter, where instead of a disaster requiring urgent attention, we got a touching tale about Casti helping a mother live long enough to see her daughter inherit the role of town ruler from her. It was the first time I heard "At Your Back" in my playthrough, and at first I thought, oh, this is sad, RIP. And then the string section kicked in, and the scene just kept getting sadder and dangerously realistic, and it took everything in me not to break down right then and there. I'm also a big proponent of spending time appropriately in a story, so seeing Casti stay around for a while was very satisfying. And of course, the very sudden whiplash into revealing Trousseau's existence was intriguing. Sai's chapter was probably the weakest in my opinion. Upon initially playing it, I considered it an A+ location for a B- story. I didn't particularly hate this chapter, but it definitely felt more akin to the OT1 writing style for me. That said, it covered some good themes, and Edmund's development from antagonist to side character, although hasty, was a nice surprise. In my heart though, I kinda wanted a dungeon-like sequence where Casti is running around on the open battlefield, tending to wounded soldiers as the objective, and all the enemies are random warriors from either faction. That'd have been cool. And then there's Casti Chapter 3. There's a good reason why this chapter is referred to just by its title alone. You don't even have to explain what you mean when you say Casti Chapter 3. Anyone who has played it just gets it. It is arguably the best section of the entire game for character stories, and one of the most emotionally devastating tales I've ever seen. We start off by finally getting to see Casti's past. The other Ayers apothecaries, Randy, Andy, Malaya, Elma, and her beloved horse Jaya, and Trousseau. All of the people she loved most in the world, living nice and quiet in the town of Helix, where these healers had set up shop. And all of this wonderful setup is quickly and horrifically torn down by a corrupted Trousseau who has lost his mind and fallen to nihility. This isn't an uncommon character trait, but I feel that Trousseau rode the line between insanity and cringe very well. The voice acting perfectly nails that failing attempt to hide the jittering madness behind his words. And thus, we watch him cause the Purple Rain, killing the entirety of Helix, save for the remaining apothecaries that scale the mountain to stop him. And once again, the decision to exclude a boss fight was the correct move on the narrative team's part. Giving us just the dungeon means we are focused on the climb itself, trying to find out why Trousseau was doing this, and removes the immense excitement that comes from a boss fight so we can stay emotionally low. This compounds when Trousseau reveals his true colors and takes off, forcing us to bear witness to the slow demise of each apothecary. Randy and Andy sacrificing themselves to tear apart the fire, Malaya carrying a compromised Casti down the mountain path, and finding the entire town dead, face down in the mud, with Elma just laying there after having put a tarp over Jaya to save him from the rain. This moment though, when Malaya calls out for help to an empty village, this was where I started to break. And not because I was already feeling misery, but because it brought a visceral memory back to the surface. The true feeling of isolation. To be utterly alone in a frightening place. It reminded me of a time from years back. I was up in the middle of the night watching zombie shows in a cabin in the middle of the woods, and every creak of wood or groan of cooling metal from the wood stove gave me a terrible fright. Because in my mind, my father and I were alone, and if anything happened, there was no one around that we could go to for help. Seeing Malaya enter and cry out, pleading for someone to help them, it all flooded back to me. This leading into seeing Elma dead just to save her horse out of love begin to break my heart. And then at the dock, everything comes full circle. Unshakable resolve begins to play as we experience the beginning of the story all over again, now with the full context of why Casti was placed in that boat, watching Malaya use the last of her strength to do everything she could to save Casti as this song played.
Oh no. Oh. Okay.
And then seeing her rest beside Jaya one last time, I still get choked up rewatching this scene even now. And when you think that it's finally over, that the depression is at its peak, we find that even Casti is choking up as she realizes...
Malaya, you're no longer in this world, are you?
No!
The revelation, the flood of tragic memories that came crashing down upon you and Casti alike, the use of Casti's unique theme variant Empty Memories that carries on into the chapter credits and afterwards, all of it is absolutely perfect and leaves you completely, utterly broken.
Goodbye, Malaya.
I can't even process that chapter. I'm fucking stun locked, and the song playing isn't helping. Yeah, that's the best fucking chapter so far. That's the best chapter in either of the two games, and one of the best chapters of a story I've seen.
But much like Casti, we get back up to stop that evil act from occurring. Casti's final chapter was a great conclusion to a great story, a race to save a kingdom from Trousseau's plague during its coronation day. I absolutely love that Casti's actions in previous chapters finally come back around to reward her. If this were Octopath 1, I could see her trying to convince the town guard of the coming danger and being completely ignored, only being asked to save them once the purple rain started. But again, better writing. Edmund returns the favor by appearing and endorsing Casti, which convinces them, seeing real consequences and rewards for events from previous chapters. I love to see it. And then the storm comes. The final face-off with Trousseau was the first final boss I did, and it did not disappoint. The setting, the tone, the preamble between the two as Casti resolves herself to actually take a life to save more. The rain mechanic that reduced my team's max HP for the rest of the fight every turn. I loved it all. Trousseau's voice performance was exemplary, and I think his character sprites may be among my favorites in the game. That one attack where he pulls out a bunch of vials and just wildly flings them at your team while screaming like a madman, chef's kiss. The freaking detail of having water pour constantly down his coat, like, damn, this boy looks good. Second phase was particularly terrifying as he locked out Casti's healing capabilities. My only healer I had brought, while I was at low HP, and he just refreshed to 12 shield points. Well, time to play out of my mind. I managed to find a very narrow route, one slim chance at victory that got me the exact amount of hits I needed to break him wide open and go in for the kill. And as always, Casti's theme blended beautifully into the boss theme, further emphasizing that stand against the storm undertone. And even after all that, the story still has more for me to cry over. The final return of Unshakable Resolve as Malaya encourages Casti to create the cure, Casti realizing that each ingredient she has come across on this journey can remedy this blighted rain. 5 items exactly. The transition into the concoct section, actually letting the player be involved and not making it just another cutscene. The max boost quote where she cries,
I'll pour my soul into this cure.
You succeed, you save the town. And it's beautiful. And then Casti gets to rest. After struggling and suffering countless times, after going through so much for this world, Casti gets to sleep, and it's the cutest goddamn sprite in the game. And then we're still not done. The final dream sequence using the lesser utilized soothe path action during my run to finally put the memory of her dear friends to rest, accompanied by empty memories, leading into the next day as Casti sees the bustling kingdom she saved. I broke. It was too beautiful and sad and well wrapped up for me not to cry. As Casti stood there being interviewed by Scrivener, I couldn't help thinking that this was the best character story Octopath has ever told. The perfect resolution to a perfect journey. This could be a novel all its own, and yet it's simply just a part of this bigger, spectacular game. Casti is the best Octopath story yet, and I encourage everyone who wants to play this game, go in and experience this character's journey with all your heart. Be open, get sucked in, and feel the emotional roller coaster that is this woman's immaculate tale. Throne is a tough one. I mean, so is her story. It can definitely be hard to sit through for a couple of reasons, and I feel that if I had to rank someone as my least favorite story, this would probably be in the running. That's not to say, however, that it doesn't have some extremely powerful moments scattered throughout. Throne's goal is freedom. Stuck in an assassin's guild known as the Black Snakes, she seeks to leave that lifestyle behind by obtaining 2 keys to the collar around her neck, each held by one of the guild's leaders, Mother and Father. So in order to get the keys, she'll have to kill both of them. See why I headcanon her as Primrose and Therian's fusion dance? However, as this plot progresses, Throne discovers multiple oddities and mysteries surrounding the Black Snakes, her mother, and how its order of successors works, ultimately culminating in a very, very terrible truth. The main problem I think I had with Throne's plot is that it was the most OT1-like. It really felt like, in the grand scheme of things, they had taken Primrose and Therian and tossed the two together into a new character. I still stand by this as my overarching understanding of her story, and even though it's not fair of me to entirely write her off for that, which I won't be, trust me, I have a lot to say coming up, but the structure at the end of the day was highly reminiscent of OT1 for me, which weakened it as a whole. I wasn't a fan of how some plot lines were structured in that game, and I still don't like it now. But that being said, there's some wild shit waiting for you within that boring structure. The opening of Throne's story was actually quite good. I really liked being thrown into the midst of a heist gone bad in the sewers, as Throne and crew try to find a way out and escape their pursuers, but can't. After that, it kind of falls into cliche for a while, but picks back up at the very end of the chapter. Puro having more than one boss sprite as the first boss in her story completely took me by surprise, and just him being the boss and the location and tone all felt really good for a tutorial boss. And then you've also got unique story moments like the blood outline over the wrong choice in Mother's Chapter 2 because Throne can smell the safe ones as she barrels through a game of poison cups. But things quickly go from, oh, that's a cool way to break the formula, to, wait, what the fuck is happening right now? We're about to get into some pretty dark topics, so feel free to skip ahead to the end of the discussion if you want, but this whole story is just fucked, like the orphanage. Okay, so when you find out where Mother is in her 3rd chapter, this leads Throne to an orphanage outside of Wellgrove where kids are being raised into becoming Black Snakes. And when she arrives, she hears a bell tolling in the distance for no apparent reason. Well, as you find out by the end of the chapter, Mother likes to take some of the kids up to the bell, tie them to it, and then proceed to give them lashes from her spiked whip, which strikes the bell as she's beating them. It's things like this that pull you out of the glaze that most of the story puts you in and makes you double take, like, wait, what was that? Now, ultimately, Father's Chapter 2 was the worst in my opinion, because while it offered a little more backstory between Father and Throne, ultimately we were just going after some bozo we knew nothing about, and the boss was someone we didn't actually give two shits for. It felt like filler to lead into the fight against Father, is what I'm saying. All that aside, however, we now enter into Throne's final chapter, the storytelling equivalent of flipping a table and knocking all the Monopoly pieces on the floor in glorious and horrifying splendor. Once Throne has killed both Mother and Father, she tries putting the keys into her collar, and they fail. This proves to be a very interesting turn of events, since everything up to this point has been about getting the keys from those two psychopaths. We now have no idea where the plot is going to go, and I like that. There are two hints as to where we should go, though. Father's last words prompting Throne to find her real father, and something from the very beginning. During the heist, the crew tried to escape the sewers through this red door, but it was locked. Investigating the sewers and trying the two keys once again, it now opens. Which brings us to Lost Seed. Okay, how do I even begin to tackle this? Lost Seed doesn't just fail the vibe check, it specifically goes out of its way to do so. What the hell happened to this kingdom? Who are all these people? Why are they all vessels? What the fuck does that mean? And where's that crying baby coming from? And why is the moon constantly hanging in the sky? God damn it. Nothing is right here. I hated every minute I had to spend here. And I love that. It is absurdly creepy and wrong in all the right ways, and every second there was dread-inducing. And it just somehow manages to keep piling on more and more and more, like when you think it's reached max anxiety induction. Nope, here's a woman who pleads for you to kill her baby. I think there was some degree of influence from Dark Souls here, with the smashed together kingdom and world-ending atmosphere reminding me of the Dreadkeep, not to mention the enemy type that literally looks like an Abyss Watcher. Either way, Lost Seed acted as the foundation for a total tone shift that really set Throne's final chapter apart from almost everything else in the game, or perhaps a tone plunge, as things are still going to get worse. Approaching the final boss, we meet Claude, a sociopathic immortal who's the true leader of the Black Snakes and Throne's real father. And also Piero's father. And also Mother's father, and also Father's father. Yes, the grand reveal is that Claude is too disinterested in upholding a legacy he was given, which will be answered in the game's finale, that he started propagating with many women in the hopes of creating an heir worthy enough to take on that legacy for him. So almost every person Throne encountered during her journey was a half-sibling of the family she never had. And she murdered them all. It is truly a vile and disgusting revelation that cements Throne's plot as this god-awful, repulsive, and yet still engrossing narrative. Which leads us into one of the coolest, if not the coolest boss fight in OT2. Claude not only has his own set of unique skills that lock you out of using certain actions until you break him, which creates this cool chain effect on the screen that only makes this fight feel even more Castlevania themed, but he also has multiple forms. Being that his bloodline was so pivotal to the plot, he transforms 3 times over the course of the fight. First into Piero, then into Mother and Father at once, and then finally when he's at low HP, Throne and her mother Marietta. This is such a badass finale that I nearly reloaded my save so I could actually do it myself. So there is one tiny little hiccup with this fight. Remember earlier in the review when I said that by the endgame your team can get a little too strong? Well, this is an endgame fight without health gates. On the boss with the lowest HP pool in his base form with only 65,000. Meaning there's no guaranteed triggers for the phase changes. Meaning I took my time while still playing the fight without throwing, and I still didn't get to see any of the transformations, so I had to go back and watch them from someone else's playthrough. Claude just decided not to transform. Honestly, I know some speedrunners may not like this, or someone will scream about player agency, but I believe if you're going to make a fight this cinematic and focused on these phases, while also giving the boss 33% less HP than all other final bosses, then putting up health gates and forcing the player into each phase should absolutely be put in place. That problem aside, I still think the fight is really cool. It's just a shame that playing fairly optimally will make you miss most of it. Beating Claude, Throne finally obtains the key to her freedom before answering Claude's question of the one thing that can't be stolen with the Dawn, a symbolic answer reflecting her anticipation for the future. But as she removes the collar, a flood of memories from all the people she's lost or killed wash over her, like a tidal wave of blood, the smell she still can't lose. And then, that's it. Throne's theme plays, the camera pulls away, and her story ends. And I love this. It is a powerfully disquieting lack of closure. Throne may have gotten out of the Black Snakes, but she isn't truly free in the way she envisioned. She still has the guilt of murdering her whole family on her mind, and their blood stains her palms. I really enjoyed this cutoff at the end, and I think it saves Throne's story from being just another story into a well-maintained piece of dark fiction. Everything is consistently awful, there's no happy ending, and I think that's totally fine. Send help. Finishing her story, Throne gets access to the Disguise EX skill, and since we haven't talked about any of her abilities, let's wrap up with those. Disguise is pretty interesting. It lets Throne act as one of her allies for a few turns, useful if you need 2 turns of someone else's kit. Throne's own latent power also just gives her another action right after her current one, so this girl gets to act a lot. Her other EX skill though, Veil of Darkness, wow is it ever good. You can get it surprisingly early and it does a lot. As discussed earlier, it deals dark damage to all enemies and then inflicts each of them with a debuff that guarantees that each of them will miss their next physical attack. Not great for damage unless you build Mage Throne, but the debuff is incredibly useful. As for the rest of the Thief kit, it feels the least evolved from OT1, and that's fine because it still works pretty decently, maybe a bit better than its original form. And of course, the Steal path action is useful to get lots of items for free, and Ambush is also great because it just knocks down NPCs without any cost as long as you meet the level requirement. Since I have nowhere else to mention it, can I say that Throne has some really fun character moments, especially when it involves clothing and fashion. I was not expecting that to be her little quirk, but I like it. Also, when she misinterprets social cues and makes conversations much darker than originally intended. I should add, I don't mind Throne's theme. I think it's incredibly fitting for her character, but because it's so heavy on those strings, it just kind of blends in with the other tracks of the game for me, so personally, it's my least favorite of the 8. Her voice acting ranges to all degrees, with a few voice lines being a bit weaker, most of them being pretty solid, and a select few deliveries that still make me shudder. I'll mention them when relevant, but I think those specific lines are probably the most badass lines in the entire game, and are definitely amongst the best deliveries in OT2. But for now, let us move on from a criminal who hates killing to a false convict that only wants to kill. When I was starting out, a few people said that I was going to like Oswald's story. I was admittedly worried again. Oh, okay, we're doing another Primrose 2.0. I don't like Oswald though. I love him. Once again, another plotline that I would consider grounds for having its own individual light novel because it was so good. Oswald quickly became one of my all-time favorites just from the opening of his first chapter alone. It's another one of the slightly edgier tales in the game, but by the end deviates to a more wholesome theme. As the game's resident scholar, Oswald's kit revolves around being the DPS caster. I think they cleaned up the scholar class a lot in its current iteration. Poor Cyrus was saddled with a pretty boring kit, but with how Advanced Magic and Aliphan's Wisdom works now, you don't need 6 of your 8 slots dedicated to different versions of spells that hit different amounts of times. And both of his path actions are just absolutely hilarious. Civilized erudite that asks for information? Fuck you, tell me what I want to know and hand over your goods or I'll beat the shit out of you. The man literally has mug. Enough said. Of course, this behavior naturally stems from his tragic tale. Once a proud researcher of a power called the One True Magic, Oswald's life was completely shattered when his home, wife, and daughter were all set ablaze by his intellectual rival Harvey, only to then be framed for setting the fire, as no clear cause for it could be found. And him being a mage, Oswald was sentenced to life on the cold prison known as Frigid Isle, whilst Harvey ran off with his research to claim the One True Magic for himself. 5 years later, sharpened physically by his experiences in prison and maintaining his mental state despite being gagged by an anti-magic muzzle, Oswald's story finally begins as we run a back-to-back chapter double feature and witness his escape from Frigid Isle with the help of fellow convict Emerald. I promise, being forced to do these chapters together is worth it. This opening section was so unbelievably good and entertaining to play. As fun and goofy as it was to run around mugging all the other prisoners with nothing but a fucking stick, there's some fantastic storytelling on display here. Oswald being rendered a mute essentially means you can't use any magic until you enter the dungeon and Oswald has his muzzle removed. But it also affects the story in that we have to see him plan an escape while being non-verbal, though we get to hear his inner monologue. The slow and gradual buildup of completing each phase of the plan before finally entering the dungeon and getting to use Oswald's whole kit with Emerald at his side, I should expand on that. Some opening chapters aren't entirely solo for combat, and they give you an NPC ally to use as you choose, which really elevates these side characters from just lingering around during the boss fight to being active comrades at arms. Great touch. Which comes in handy in the boss fight against Warden Davids. I do have to say, I like that the first chapter ended with the boss, but the prison break wasn't over. They leave the actual conclusion for the second chapter, which is once more used as a storytelling chapter and doesn't force too many more encounters than necessary. I really felt for Oswald when Emerald split off and ultimately sacrificed himself to distract the guards in a big way so that Oswald could successfully sail across the ocean on his ice raft. And yes, I know about the bottle. Yes, it's very sad. But then, just when I thought they couldn't get any more peak, Oswald is rescued and brought onto the mainland, is fed, clothed, and brought back to full health, only for his savior to ask one simple thing of him: to live an honorable life now. And the second that man leaves, Oswald begins monologuing, "Nah, fuck that, I'm still out for revenge," as his absolutely awesome death march of a theme plays in the background. And then the chapter just ends. Like, yes, this is so good. Not because it's Oswald being edgy, but because there's a continued commitment to his goal that goes against anything that anyone in the world could tell him. The world tells him, no, don't go for revenge, and he's still gonna chase it. It is perfectly setting itself up to become a wonderful tragedy. Chapter 3 is a bit more plain, but still an important step in the story, visiting the remains of Oswald's home and getting information on Harvey's whereabouts from the guard captain that falsely and knowingly arrested him. I really like the attack where the boss just tries to get us to spare him and he gives you a bunch of money. Very funny. And then Chapter 4 happens and everything gets miserable again. We finally get to see the two meet once again, only for Harvey to reveal that he kept Oswald's family alive in order to use each of the girls for his experiments, as they were part of the lineage of light. Then a grotesque dark golem appears, letting out a haunting moan before Oswald realizes the truth. It's Rita, his wife. The ensuing boss fight of Oswald having to destroy the monstrosity that the remains of his wife had been turned into, where she has a move that can wipe your party before the boss kills itself out of grief, only to lead right into seeing his daughter run into Harvey's arms and not even recognize him. It is soul-crushing. But it is also this moment where the tone of the story completely turns on a dime. Now, it's no longer about revenge on Harvey, it's about saving Elena out of love. And then the final chapter, Having Oswald beat the crap out of possessed townsfolk as he hurries to the resting place of Darkest, only to be a second short of stopping Harvey from completing the Book of Demons, crafted from Elena's blood and Darkest's corpse, dear God. And then the beautiful moment of revelation as Oswald tosses aside his desire for revenge, only wishing to protect his beloved daughter. He obtains the one true magic, leading right into the final battle with Harvey. And that opening prompt stating that Oswald's second EX skill was unlocked, the one true magic, with its incredible animation and absurd damage. I loved this final boss. Harvey's epic channeling stance, and hearing Oswald's theme evolve from this deep, marching beat of anger into this glorious, triumphant reprisal of love and guardianship, to rise to the occasion and do the right thing instead of falling to his obsession for revenge. The guitars elevating this piece beyond any version of his theme prior and possibly being the best for the Dawn variant. It brings a man to tears. The ending of the story was perfect as well. It's not a generic everyone's happy finale, but it's enough for Oswald as he still has business to attend to, investigating the people behind Harvey that were responsible for his family's downfall. Love it, love it, love it. Now, of course, none of this would have hit nearly as hard without the superb talent of Alejandro Saab, who completely sold the character and gave a very powerful performance throughout the entirety of the game. There's this amazing balance of threatening and intimidating lines, like Warrior Oswald just has this line.
I'll kill you.
So like, there's that. But then there's also very entertaining lines that perfectly exhibit Oswald's complete and utter lack of social grace. There is one line in particular that was quick to become a meme for me and for my chat whenever it was said during combat, and that line is, "Thinking time."
Thinking time.
Thinking time! That's such a good line.
I still quote this line to this day. I just adore this line. It's too funny that a highly educated man who managed to memorize the equations to the one true magic for more than 5 years in prison also talks like a caveman with limited vocabulary whenever he's in combat. Same with like fire, burn. It's just so amusing. Great work, Alejandro. I also want to give credit to Craig Lee Thomas for his work with Harvey. It is very clear that he had a lot of fun chewing up the scenery in his scenes, and God bless him for it. What a fun villain that still presented a very real threat. Oh, right. His other EX skill, Teach, has niche use cases where it could be good, but you need to do the proper setup to make it worth your time passing buffs off of Oswald onto someone else. Well, that was 3 miserable souls back to back to back. Maybe it's time we step back and relaxed for a change. Have a story that's a little more happy in the end. Partitio was exactly what I needed. Man, I knew it was going to be enjoyable, but I did not expect this story to actually leave an impression on how I feel about commerce and its place in the world. The way that Partitio conducts proper business, punishing those who cheat and scam and hoard wealth for their own greedy selves, is very invigorating to watch in a world where the price of everything material seems to be skyrocketing, but the value of people is treated as though it were nothing. Partitio himself put it quite eloquently in his very first chapter.
Every fortune's made from a pile of these. The little guys. Treat one with contempt and you'll lose them all. That goes for money and for people.
All that aside, I think Partitio's tale was excellent through and through. It didn't have the same emotional highs for me as some others, but it was consistently good, and that's the most important thing of all. To start, I was not expecting so much time coverage in the first chapter, like actually going back and seeing Partitio's childhood, and watching the town of Oarsrush grow and fall. That first chapter did a wonderful job of selling me on his character, especially once you confront Gif and Partitio is just absolutely fuming and ready to beat down his landlord for being a scumbag. The man rolls a nat 20 in charisma at every chance he gets with his poses, his quotes, and his incredible line delivery from Jazz Patrick. Although, I did nearly screw myself over. See, the game made the mistake of giving me money, so I started buying everything but the item I was supposed to get. And then I ran out of money, so I had to go solo grind Particio for a while. I was literally in the mines fighting for my life. Thank God they left that place open so you could do that. Chapter 2 was fine, probably the weakest one, but it certainly wasn't bad, even though it introduced her. Look, I like Ori a lot, but as I stated earlier, she is the prime example of why audio mixing matters. Seriously, did anyone check to compare her voice volume with the others? She actually hurt my ears when she first appeared. But that aside, I really like her character. The boss for this chapter was also surprisingly creative. A big dog. Now usually I'm not the biggest fan of random creature shows up as the chapter boss, but I can give this one some leniency. Mainly because Thurston having a guard dog makes some sense for the plot, and its attacks have incredibly fun flavor, like the summoning of skeletons because the dog is digging up bones, instead of just randomly having adds or only generic bite and claw attacks. The chapter ending was also rather satisfying, with Particio confronting Rock early on in his story and making the deal to buy the Steam Engine rights for 8 billion leaves. Baller move. Now, after this, you get access to Particio's Sense of Commerce, which are 3 pseudo-side stories that you have to complete at least one of to progress his main plot in Chapter 3. And honestly, I really enjoyed all of them. From these quests onwards, this is where I really started paying attention and appreciating the role of business and trade within Celestia, and seeing how that can bring people happiness through a good, healthy, and equitable economy. But sidetrack for a moment, when Particio bought that boat from Terry, I thought, oh, that's sweet of him. But then they were making me choose my colors, and I said, hold up. Yeah, just giving me access to the boating part of the game through a Sense of Commerce was the last thing I was expecting to find. I already thought the overworld was fleshed out enough, and now here we are, sailing on the high seas with our very own boat. So many possibilities opened up in that moment, so many new enemies and bosses and dungeons and treasures to find. I adored every second spent on the ocean, and I love the open sea combat theme so much. Now where were we again? Oh, that's right, Chapter 3, another one of my all-time favorites. Genuinely, I loved everything about this one. To start, this was my first time entering Wellgrove, and as I stated during the music section, I just melt whenever I hear A Verdant Wind Blows. It's such a beautiful town theme, both at day and night. The next part that made this chapter so awesome? Alrond. Like, I'm sorry, Crick, I love you lots, buddy, but Alrond won my heart for best sidekick character. He's such a good-hearted character, someone of extreme wealth that has deep compassion for the people of his town and their welfare, and a bit mischievous too. I also immediately sussed out his voice actor as Todd Haberkorn, one of my all-time faves, as he does the voice work for Drifter in Destiny 2 as well. Gambit forever. While this chapter falls into my mental placement of Octopath 1 formatting, I think the story is just told so much better and is way too feel-good for me to be negative towards it. Seeing Particio work to revive Wellgrove's economy in exchange for Alrond bankrolling his steam engine purchase, all whilst again we have A Verdant Wind Blows, was enough to nearly bring me to tears. It was such a joyous chapter by its conclusion. Even the boss was great. I immediately caught on to the gimmick, but thought it was fun to find Thurston hiding out in the fog and only damageable once you broke the steam engine. And of course, Particio being the Chad he is and offering Thurston a job was just icing on the cake. And then there's the big finale. Chapter 4 being set on a highly industrialized rock island really showed off the extreme end of what state technology was in for Celestia, and it was really neat to traverse. I loved Alrond's stupidly extravagant entrance, arriving with the 8 billion leaves in cash because he knew that Rock would pull some shit and try to claim that the check was null and void. And of course, we all know what the best part of the chapter is. Drain! Funny suplex joke. I played FF6 too. But in all seriousness, I thought this was a cool final boss fight, seeing Particio and Rock's ideologies of commerce come to one last tumultuous clash in the form of Steam Tank Obsidian versus a bunch of fucking guys. This fight felt like it was designed around you using hired help, and you know what? I didn't really mind it. I held off on using it since it felt extremely strong the few times I did, so it was a limited time only type deal. Anyways, Particio beats Rock, gets the Steam Engine license, and begins actively impacting the world in a major way by establishing a railroad system across Celestia. See, these are the kinds of moments I'm talking about when I say that the character's actions impact the world in this game more than OT1. Particio constantly improves other people's lives, and we get to actually see those changes come about. It makes for an extremely fun and very heartwarming story that'll have you rooting for this cowboy all day long. Since I already started talking about hired help, may as well mention the rest of the Merchant's kit. As ever, Merchant is an incredible support kit, maintaining a number of abilities from the first game that made the kit cracked. Hired help feels far more useful than ever before, but Sidestep still remains an S-tier ability. As for his EX skills, these were probably the ones I used the least, though they definitely have use cases. Share SP is fairly obvious in what it does, but I'd rather just hand out a plum or use shared BP instead. Negotiate schedule though, holy, what a crazy ass ability. It's literally the I will pay you X dollars to fuck off right now meme. Just paying money and getting to act on an opponent's turn instead. Wild shit, love it. Didn't use it much, but if I wanted to... Damn, what am I forgetting? Oh, his latent power. Yeah, being able to just get max BP at the press of a button, insane value. It may be a boring latent, but it is damn good. As for path actions, hire only mattered to me for the passives in cost reduction or increased leaves on selling items, but that was still nice to have. And purchase is good. If you can buy the thing, you buy the thing. That's it. And of course, we can't end without mentioning his sassy little saxophone theme punctuated with some killer guitar riffs in the combat variants. So good. Well done, Particio. You made your daddy proud. And speaking of making their fathers proud... Wait, that came out wrong. Agnia. I'm having trouble finding the right words to begin this section. I think that it might have to do with the fact that I'm bad at talking about my feelings on a personal level, which is what led to Casty's section being so long. But here, I was influenced with the same level of intensity as Casty, but in the complete opposite direction. I haven't had something move me this deeply in a long while to bring so much joy into my soul, to the point of bringing me to tears from how beautiful this story was. I'm usually a stick in the mud when it comes to heartfelt journeys about following your dreams, mostly because they tend to feel artificial and overwhelmingly gooey or unearned. But Agnia's story was just the right amount of everything. You saw her struggle, you rooted for her success, and in the end, she worked hard and made her dreams come true. Every Agnia chapter was a pleasure to play through. It was always a perfect break from the generally darker tone of the rest of the game, which I love, to be clear. I enjoy a darker story most of the time, but too much in it can spoil the broth. Agnia was the honey in this stew that kept my spirits up and brought back the energy required to handle things like Casty and Throne. Her first chapter, I will admit, I had a slight problem with, still do depending on the day. As I stated with Particio, I'm not a fan of random generic monsters showing up to force a boss fight into the story when we don't need one, and the Dorador was pretty on point for that. However, I also recognize that it was Agnia's first chapter, so we needed a tutorial for combat somehow, and based on the side stories later, I've kind of grown to accept it. Other than that one curveball, her intro chapter was very wholesome. I love the people of Cropdale, especially Paula because she's a very funny lesbian, and Gus because I managed to suss him out as Bryce Papenbrook in about 5 seconds. You can't hide from me, Tiz. Overall, it set everything up for her journey perfectly and left a very favorable impression with its ending.
Good luck, Agnia!
Chapter 2 was where I really started to get into it. Seeing Agnia go to the big city and just start off as a dancer in a rundown tavern, working her way up and slowly building up a name for herself, Lemeni was a fun but still reasonably threatening villain for her, and I love how she stands up for Gil in his tavern. I may as well mention it now since it's relevant, but Xanth Hun did an incredible job with Agnia. The way she manages to have Agnia speak in a city accent with a slight country undertone, which begins to come out more and more when Agnia gets flustered or excited, is just well done. Big props for that level of skill.
You regret trying to take away people's fun.
And then ending the chapter with not only the introduction of the Song of Hope, something that she would be creating over the course of her adventure, but also the reveal that Dulcinea wasn't really to be trusted in that post-credit scene. Wow, was not expecting that. Her third chapter is honestly kind of forgettable in the grand scheme of things. I did like the characters a lot, and it was a Tropu Hopu chapter, so you can't complain about the location, but it did feel like a quick pit stop that didn't offer a whole lot. Giselle overcoming her fears was also a good lesson for those who needed it. Chapter 4 was a bit more involved, and finally brings Dulcinea into the forefront as Agnia's rival. Most of the chapter being about helping a troubled youth find a reason to live was a nice story carrying on the themes of hope, culminating in Agnia confronting Dulcinea and trying to stop her plan of demolishing hello there! It's nothing. Veronica's fine. Yep. Following the route of classic 80s youth movies, Agnia decides to have a dance-off with Dulcinea in the grand finale, taking us to Chapter 5. It was really nice seeing everyone help Agnia get to the stage successfully, and Mary Hills using a verdant wind blows is always a plus. And then the fake-out with Lemeni because, yeah, Veronica! Because Veronica comes in and sucker punches him to help us get to the real battle, that was just peak comedy. Love that. Of course, nothing else in this story could compare to its finale. The two-form Dulcinea fight was actually kinda tough. I tried to slow myself down on purpose the first time, since I'd been blazing through bosses prior, and I ended up having my only wipe on a final chapter boss. But even then, Dulcinea was still really tough. She also seemed to have a bias against Ochette. Well, anyways.
Man, she really doesn't like Ochette.
Now, I know I'm just delaying the inevitable because it's gonna make me emotional, so let's just get on with it. Song of Hope is one of the greatest pieces of music I've ever heard. It is a gloriously inspiring tune to have playing after fighting through the first phase, seeing Agnia about to give in, only to have all her friends and family cheer her on to At Your Back, which admittedly made me start to choke up a bit, only to culminate in this grand revival of Agnia's theme, dominating the rest of the boss fight and casting its magic upon me, to only leave me with smiles and tears for its entire duration. The guitar and drums kicking in just right, the gorgeous vocalist finally joining the track with the horns blaring and flute fluttering upwards, higher and higher like a bird taking flight. That is all I can focus on when I hear this song. And opening the fight with the revelation of obtaining her EX skill of the same name was just the final piece of the puzzle that broke me. A very fitting final ability to learn, and a useful one at that, allowing me to extend allies' buffs for more turns, just as this song was encouraging me to fight on. Even when things were getting stressful from Dulcinea stealing my Hikari, I never lost hope thanks to this song. This song alone is the reason so many people praise Agnia's journey, and I can't blame them. The rest of her story is still great, but this finale reaches heights of exceptionalism that is difficult to match in any other game, let alone by other parts of this game. The Song of Hope is magic incarnate and musical beauty sublime. I also let Ochette get the final hit in as revenge for all the bullshit thrown her way. The ending was just as heartwarming as everything else, seeing everyone gather together to congratulate Agnia on her newfound stardom. Even Lemeni turning a new leaf and becoming her biggest fan was as nice to see as it was funny. And mad respect to Dulcinea, she was a respectable rival, she didn't cheat or do anything untoward to hinder Agnia's progress, and she accepted the loss with grace. Good antagonist right there. So, what I'm saying with all this is, Agnia's story was very good. The jokes about Peaches were odd though. Just saying. R.I.P. Particio. As for her kit, the dancer still works great as a buffing support, and Agnea felt way more fitting for the role than Primrose did. Her latent power is a nice one-time Seal Teej cast, and Ruinous Kick is very funny, and actually good. But everything Agnea could do pales in comparison to her other EX skill, Windy Refrain. Who in the development team thought this was balanced? A party-wide wind attack that bumps your entire team's actions to the start of the order next turn. This ability just blows Leghold Trap out of the water. Holy fuck. This is not okay. It's good, don't get me wrong, but god damn is it broken. Both of her path actions were fine for my playthrough. Entreat was definitely a decision to incorporate a level-based NPC action for gaining items. Again, glad they toned down the Peaches joke in translation. And Allure is a little more interesting thanks to Agnea's dance session passive that grants a bonus when buffing someone based on the person she's bringing along for the ride. As I said, Agnea's story affected me on a very personal level, and it's something that is going to stick with me for a very long time. I won't ever forget the tale of that bright-eyed young girl coming into her own and following her mother's footsteps to become a star. The music of this journey was immaculate to behold. Agnea's theme, her In Pursuit of Hope jingle before boss fights, the Moon Dance song, and of course the Song of Hope that still lives rent-free in my heart and mind. Screams of love and jubilation, and I'm glad that I got to experience it. This one is a bit tricky. I've come to summarize Temenos as an S+ character stuck in a B- story. I don't hate this story, but I do feel the ball was dropped pretty hard as it went along. I also think this will be the shortest character discussion, because I don't feel that I have a lot of things to say. The opening was fantastic, I'll give it that. Getting to see the past and actually battling V-Day as Aelfric was a really cool start. Using god skills is funny to me. And then ending the section by revealing it was Temenos forgetting his lines as it was all a retelling of the histories to kids immediately sets his character in place. A skeptical cleric who could care less about the church and more about finding truth in the world. And Jordan Dash Cruz sold that to a T, literally a perfect casting. Now, the decision to do a murder mystery that is investigated over the course of his whole story, not a bad premise. However, the main problem I felt is that because only so many characters were introduced and only given short snippets of dialogue, it was pretty easy to suss out that Caldina was going to be the baddie, or was at least somehow involved. Where I start to get really lost is in her motivation. If I'm understanding it correctly, her people, the Call, were slaughtered by the Moonshade Order since they were descendants of the hero that stopped Darkest. So she wanted to use the Book of Night to gain enough power to get revenge on those she deems responsible for the Call people's demise, which includes the Church and the gods. Again, with the power of the Book of Night, which is what her people were completely against. Am I the only one feeling like Caldina drank some stupid juice? It's more generic humanity is a disease rhetoric for an unimpressive nitwit that plans to fight fire with fire. I know that this is an important theme for later in the game, but the way she's decided to act on this belief came across very blandly. With how good the rest of the game is written, I was hoping for something much more interesting as the reason why someone was committing all these murders to intentionally draw the ire of the gods. That's the whole appeal of murder mysteries, learning why someone would commit such a heinous crime. This is just kinda lame. Crick is really the saving grace of this story. His interactions with Temenos and their obvious Holmes and Watson parallels work perfectly, and were by far the most entertaining part of any of these chapters. The only reason I pick Elrond over Crick is because Crick needs to act as that foil to Temenos, whereas Elrond can exist without Partitio and is still an awesome character. And we can't forget the final part of the Time Triumvirate.
Thinking time.
Cleaning time.
Investigation time.
The truth lies in the flame.
I will say, the first time this happened, my jaw dropped. I thought these investigation sequences were unbelievably cool. The blue magic projections of past events in Temenos' mind palace, the very meticulous music, the revelations to be found within them, all very cool to experience and play, instead of it just being a cutscene. Speaking of, I do like his theme, though his battle variants are way better. I think Temenos' story is fairly solid for the first half. Chapter 1 was a good kickoff, Chapter 2 was alright, but had a good surprise with Vados being immediately revealed as an agent of the murderer, and then the third chapters happened. Crackridge was fine for the most part, although there was one moment that caught my eye in particular when the woman that tries to seduce Temenos Prior confesses her sins to him. It was strangely surprising to see something so private that a cleric would do in real life happen on screen, and I enjoyed his resolution of it. And of course, Stormhail is sad time because of Crick's death. I was sad to see it, and very hyped by Temenos' level of anger when confronting Kubari.
Where is she?
Is that anger I see in your eyes? How unusual.
But I think that was also the moment where the story peaked and immediately began cresting back downwards. After nearly everything had been revealed, the entirety of Chapter 4 didn't really intrigue in any way, and as I already mentioned, Kaldina's plan was just stupid to me. Her form change was fucking sick though, reminded me of the Dancer of the Boreal Valley from Dark Souls 3. Temenos' kit as a cleric was good, it felt very familiar with Slingin' Light and Curin' Blights. His EX skills were both excellent, Prayer for Plenty was fantastic for setting up my party so that they wouldn't need healing for a good while, provided I gave Temenos the Seal of Diffusion from Arcanist since it allowed me to overheal the party. And Heavenly Shine? More like Temenuke, good lord can the man hit hard with this skill. Why did they count it as magic? Why is Nuke allowed to hit 3 times? Guide I barely used, and Interrogate, while very funny to bully someone in your mind palace, I also barely used. I got more use out of his latent power during interrogations, having all hits remove shield points on that turn, but it came in clutch in some other cases, and I feel that it could be really strong if you build into it. In the end, I still liked Temenos' journey, but was disappointed by the direction it took and how it was concluded. It's a shame that a character with such a strong on-screen presence was given this great potential with a mystery plotline, only for the culprit to have one of the most basic cookie-cutter motives ever that was then run through a blender and molded back together weirdly. And so, we come full circle, ending with my starter. I mean, what were you expecting? I'm a very warrior-coded person, and Hikari did not disappoint in the slightest. Every time I thought about Hikari's story outside of playing it, I was saying, yeah, it was pretty alright. But whenever I got to a new Hikari chapter, I remembered immediately why I loved him so much. I know a lot of people probably write off his story as a very generic warrior plot, but even though that's exactly what it is, I cannot help loving it. This story covered a lot of the most common themes imaginable with an air of grace and seriousness that I admire immensely, the biggest of them all in my eyes being temperance and honor. I don't think I've seen a more honorable character in a piece of media, and I definitely have not seen one be forced to struggle from attacks on so many different angles. The feud with his brother, who usurps the throne and murders their father. His best friend turning on him to take a higher place in the world. His dear training partner, a leader who dedicates herself to Mugen's rule instead of freedom out of fear of retaliation. And of course, the most important of all, the inner turmoil with his literal shadow self, who endlessly calls for him to give in to his bloodlust and continue the spiral of despair that his homeland has been caught in for generations. All of these obstacles, and yet Hikari maintains his resolve and does the right thing. When taking all of these into consideration, how easy it would be for him to fall or to give up, and then see him still fight, even when that calls for the literal sense of the word. The last thing in the world he wants to do is the sign of a truly inspiring character to me. Hikari's very theme expresses this in the most clear way. It's a beautiful traditional style piece, slow and strong, but it's this one moment on the second line that really stands out to me. Again, not a music person, so forgive me in advance, but this moment right here, normally in a track like this, my brain is expecting that note at the end to go way higher in more of a celebratory way. But here, the strings stay lower than I thought they'd go, humble, restrained. And if it were any other note or pitch or whatever, I don't think this track would hit nearly as hard. That one note is frighteningly accurate in depicting Hikari in a nutshell to me, keeping itself under control with an underlying tone of deep sorrow. I adore this theme for many reasons, but this little moment is by far my favorite of the whole thing. And then you get that gorgeous Japanese flute that just takes over with the drums backing. God, more soundtracks need that instrument. Leading into the horns, finally uplifting the song into one of strength and triumph, the song of a true king. The beginning of his story was absolutely perfect and exactly what I wanted. Just a little bit of establishing dialogue to show Hikari's honorable traits, and then boom, right into combat. And what a good tutorial combat it was! Tempest on the Battlefield was an incredible track to play for this opening section, and I loved its sparingful usage throughout the game. The environment with all the NPCs fighting each other, the joining of Ritsu and Raimei, I loved it! The rest of the chapter was fantastic too. I really liked that Hikari was thrown to such a low state with the loss of his father, friends, and home all in one fell swoop, and then having to take the blame for it all on top of that. And then of course we have Hikari being forced to flee Ku with Unshakable Resolve playing, another song I've already praised greatly, as he promises to return and save the kingdom, and then finally ending on that illustrious monologue about Hikari's plan to retake Ku, all while his theme plays and the camera pans over the desert. Just yes, 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 yes! Perfect chapter ending, and his explicit saying that his journey begins here and his need to seek out allies for his cause really cements Hikari in my mind as Octopath 2's main protagonist, amongst other reasons. Chapter 2 was another reflection of Ulbrich with the tournament arc, but Kazan manipulating the whole thing to raise funds for Hikari's rebellion and having complete faith that Hikari would win it all was beyond brilliant. Fun chapter, love format mix-ups like this, and very entertaining overall. Chapter 3 was obviously the weakest one, just procuring weapons by interrupting a deal between Ku and some black market dealers, while also meeting Ritsu once more and getting to learn a skill I'm now going to spam for the rest of the playthrough, Divine Dual Edge. Speaking of, let's just go over his kit for a moment. The Warrior is, in my opinion, the returning job with the most interesting kit evolution. There are still some one-to-one carryover skills, but others like Aggressive Slash and Piercing Thrust are neat reinterpretations of old abilities. Vengeful Blade is an incredibly good skill that I slept on until the Kama boss fight, and I wish Enervating Blade's description was actually correct, but otherwise is another skill I enjoyed. Now, Hikari's signature ability to learn moves from other people he beats is insanely overpowered. There is some truly despicable shit he can get his hands on, and might as well make him as good as the old War Master from Octopath 1. His path action for challenging then was one of my most used throughout my time with this game, as he usually won, got good ass rewards for it, and it could knock people out with very little resource commitment. Bribe, on the other hand, less so. Like, unused almost to the point of forgetting it existed, like Ochet's Provoke. And as for his latent power, well, let's hold off on that for just a bit longer, okay? I want to give some extra attention to Chapter 4. While a relatively short chapter, I think making Hikari's penultimate battle be against one of his closest friends was naturally the best way to increase the difficulty of his quest. This confrontation of two allies, the revelations that come forth, and the stunningly effective ending of the chapter. Just Hikari's theme playing, Raimei breaking down, quite convincingly to me, I might add.
My clan, I was ready to kill you to keep them safe for the second time.
And then Hikari just leaving, and the chapter ends. What a cliffhanger. That is how you get it done. That is how you end moments like that. No overly extended epilogue, no post-credits where we see Raimei humming or hawing over helping Hikari, no flash to Ku where we see Mugen preparing for Hikari's siege. It just ends. And it's beautifully disquieting, that lack of resolution. But of course, nothing compares to the peak of Chapter 5. Shorter than I was expecting, but thrilling nonetheless. Kazan's crazy plan to get into Ku, Raimei's amazing appearance to another round of unshakable resolve, standing her ground against Mugen and declaring allegiance to the new king, and her full dedication to Hikari. God, I love this story.
We are the pride of the sands. Watch us dance in the wind. My spear shall pierce the heavens and bring their judgment down upon my enemies.
Now, I know before I said that I appreciated the chapter mix-ups, how some characters had chapters with no bosses, but I'm not going to complain that the warrior has a boss fight in every chapter, and I'm certainly not going to complain about a boss gauntlet now. So the rematch against Ritsu was completely expected. Great way to bring things full circle. Now, just as I was about to enter the fight, I was saying to myself, man, I know it's going to play something like Critical Clash 1 here, but it would be so good if they used Fierce Confrontation instead, the optional monster boss theme. So you can imagine my sheer delight when we enter the fight, get this great, vicious, spiteful monologue from Ritsu, and blasting in the background, it's Fierce Confrontation! This fight was a painful but satisfying wrap-up of Hikari and Ritsu's rivalry and their conflicting ideals. Now, I haven't really been talking about Mugen, despite the fact that I'm about to say this was the coolest final boss fight of all the paths, and that's because there's not really a lot to say. Mugen wasn't a deeply interesting villain, he just provided a face to the tyranny of Ku that Hikari was fighting against all along. That said, this was the coolest final boss fight of all the paths. We have our returning warrior final boss who's on a horse that came from nowhere, and also why is he riding it indoors? Which leads into a great confrontation with Hikari's shadow, finally facing off against his demons and casting them aside with the help of his friends, unraveling his shadow's hold and turning it into the light's radiance latent power, which means I can now talk about it. While a little sad that the change of name didn't add or evolve any of the 3 options Hikari has for his latent, they're all still really cool. Sogetsu-sen was a nice 2-hit chunker, and Tenretsu-san was my go-to big boy DPS chunk for a while, because it had the word powerful in the description. Which wasn't wrong, but it led me to believe Hyenka just did diddly damage in comparison, but offered an extra action as compensation. That was not the case. Hyenka is just the best one, hands down, regardless of the word powerful not being in its description, because it still hits hard. And to get them over with, Shinju Manjigiri was an awesome final EX skill to get after the story, a much stronger burst move than Brand's Thunder or Tenretsu-san or anything else I had, and a fun callback to Hikari's first learned move. As for Ultimate Stance, look, I sincerely believe this ability has a place in the game, especially since you can build around basic attacks going wide, even if it immediately gets outclassed by any AoE learned move, Provoked Beast, or just the Inventor's Catapult. I like Ultimate Stance, okay? Let's move along. Of course, after overcoming the shadow, Mugen grabs the Dark Blood Blade and transforms into the sick-ass Enshrouded King, and then we get Hikari vowing to strike him down as the other competitor for best final boss variant plays. Ah, I love this game.
One way or the other, we fight for the final time, brother.
Oswald and Hikari, I think both have the best, most natural or fitting versions of the Journey Ends themes, and it is so encouraging here that it is hard for me not to tear up at the sheer sense of finality this track brings. Plus, look at this boss! It's fucking sick! Look at him! Great finale, really challenging with a back-to-back-to-back-to-back boss gauntlet. Loved every second. But there's still the ending to discuss. Hikari's coronation was exactly what I expected of him, and more. His refusal to operate as the kings of old, to not let the newfound sense of nobility get to his head and just recognize his people as people, to care for them, and his open desire to build a better home. That final speech was Howard Wong's best moment as Hikari, among many other great ones. His theme playing as the crowd cheers and the speech goes on, fading to black and celebrating the liberation of Ku and the rest of Hinoyuma. I gotta admit, it was making me choke up again.
And together, we shall all build a better home!
But then, they do one more thing that really sets Hikari apart for me. At Ritsu's grave, his former friend turned rival, the man he killed to follow his path to its end, Hikari meets with Mika, Ritsu's sister, and they reflect on all the suffering that had happened before peace could come. And as we fade away to Hikari's end card, we don't get his theme a second time. We get Ku's theme. Where do I even begin to express how cool this is? Not only does this make Hikari the only character in the series thus far to not have their theme play on the credits card, but it is a magnificent song to use in terms of theming. Because to Hikari, his journey was never about becoming king. Nothing about himself particularly mattered to him. Only that Ku be set free and its cycle of bloodshed be brought to a definitive end. It was always about his people, never himself. Hikari is one of those kinds of fictional characters that makes me want to be a better person, as cringe as that is to say. But it's true. I would never say I relate to him, because that's even more cringe, but also not true. And seeing how much he has to suffer through to achieve his goal, the irony in the fact that he's constantly fighting against everyone, even himself, in a bid to end all fighting and bloodshed is not lost on me, nor is it a particularly original idea. It's comparable to Throne in the sense that both have to cut through so many people to achieve the ends they want. But while Throne ends on a much more grim note, Hikari's feels more somber. But I think Hikari's story covers these themes with a level of sincerity and grace that I could only wish other tales had. He's probably the most honorable character I've ever seen in a piece of media, and it makes me wish that myself and more people had a little more Hikari in them. Maybe then we'd be able to understand each other a little better and tone down our own bloodshed, even for just a moment. So, that concludes the characters' journeys. In the first Octopath, this is pretty much where the story ends, unless you decide to do Kit's side quests and go fight Galdera for the true ending, which very clumsily connects the first cast stories together with very thin threads. But for Octopath 2, we still have a ways to go. Throughout the course of the game, there have been pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together to build up this finale. The most obvious and strange one is the Dark Nights, where entering any zone in the open world has a rare chance of growing darker, a purple mist spreading across the zone. The music changes to this ominous track, and eventually you will encounter a shadow creature. When that monster is defeated, the area returns to normal, and you're left to wonder what in the hell just happened. But as the game goes on, these occurrences become more common. You also have more subtle hints, such as the loading screen icon changing as you complete certain chapters. Then you have the cross paths to finish up. Each of these set up even more plot beats for the grand finale. Oswald and Partitio work with an astrologer who notes that by looking at the stars, he can tell that the nights are getting longer. Throne and Temenos have another detective tale where they investigate the church's treasure known as Alpates, which is revealed to be a descendant of the Lumina clan who gives them a shard of a broken mirror before she is killed. Ochette and Casti investigate a spreading darkness in the forests of the Leaflands, very similar to the Dark Knights, and actually encounter the Shadow itself, an entity referenced frequently throughout several of the Traveler's stories. And Hikari and Agnia, well, they don't do a lot to advance the setup, but it does cover a lute player named Yomi and the loss of her sister, Suki, who died in Hikari's arms during Mugen's takeover of Ku at the beginning of his story. It's a more somber tale about loss and reminiscence, and if anything, is meant to remind the player of Ku's tyranny. Otherwise, aside from finding a few more pieces of lore scattered around the world and doing the voice-acted side quests, once all 8 Travelers' tales are completed along with the 4 crossed paths, a new quest will become available: the Journey for the Dawn. I'm very glad that they made the true ending way more accessible and straightforward to unlock this time around, especially considering how incredible it was. The Journey for the Dawn was one of the best finales I've ever gotten to experience. The kickoff with all 8 Travelers having a little campfire, discussing the unfinished plot threads that some of them had yet to resolve, and then night falls. Forever. The sacred flames being snuffed out, the world left covered in a ceaseless darkness, leaving you to figure out what to do with very minimal guidance. Love that. I like when the game stops holding you by the hand and just says, figure it out, you can do it. Of course, you can kind of cheat by just looking for the places with the highest levels, but still. Each of the 4 torches that needed to be reignited had a neat little story reveal. I thought Min's reveal as Arcanette was pretty decent, and her boss fight was equally tough and mesmerizing. The monstrosity on Todo Haha was a fine boss, though I kinda wish we got to see Petrichor just a smidge more than in that one cutscene here in the finale. But the other 2 really intrigued me. The Felsun Ruins was a very lengthy read, but a great one nonetheless. I did enjoy the journals in the Gate of Finis from Octopath 1, so I did not mind seeing everything laid out here across, 17 pages? Especially when their existence made sense after learning their owner. I was not expecting Ori to be an accomplice to the Moonshade Order in the slightest. However, I was quick to discern that her brother was Oboro, as I had found his journal in Ku during Hikari's first chapter, and that bit of lore had been eating at me for a good chunk of the playthrough. And it only took me a little longer to figure out who Oboro actually was, and that twist completely blew me away. Kazan being the true one behind all of this was a really great reveal. Yes, Arcanette was probably doing stuff to resurrect Vide beforehand, but Oboro was the one with the true ambition to end mankind, to bring about eternal night. So, in my head, he gets the credit. It completely made sense, considering how he was praised as a strategist for his entire runtime in Hikari's story, the raising of funds in Chapter 2 to aid the Moonshade Order's acquiescence of the Dark Blood weaponry, the orchestration of Mugen's rise and downfall, along with him staying behind after Hikari's final battle to claim the sword. Yeah, I see you, you sneaky bastard. Great twist villain, even if I think it hit a bit harder for me because I was a Hikari main. I also appreciate the touch of making every character's true villain's name spell Octopath as well, but in the reverse order of the heroes. It was so fulfilling to see the characters' stories actually be tied together in varying but all meaningful ways this time around. Even Partitio and Agnia have connections to the Moonshade Order through Ori and Tansy, even if nothing particularly dark happens in their plots. Which I kinda like, honestly. The plots that didn't need it weren't forced to have it, so their stories can stay nice and fun, and then later on, when you learn about that one little thorn of evil that was hidden away, it comes off as a really surprising twist later on. Compared to, like, Tressa just owning the diary of some dude that was put through a ritual. And let's not forget the cool-ass puzzle with Alpate's mirror shard and having to swap around party members so you had the people that matched the statues at each location before you could relight the sacred flame. The pairs being the same ones from the cross paths. Cute touch. I also appreciate the permanent addition of the formation feature, so I no longer need to run to the tavern to swap people around. Smart move. And then it was time. Castle Vidania rose from the ocean floor, we sailed straight for it, and ascended the stairs. It's a shame that the island wasn't more than a single staircase, because again, Yasunori killed it with Invitation to Darkness. Then again, I'm also grateful that I didn't have to fight through a whole dungeon or boss rush again to take on the big bad, so this is fine. Words cannot even begin to describe how I feel about Vide the Wicked, but I'm gonna try my best. This may very well be the best, or tied for the best, final boss fight I've ever experienced. Kazan's final words of offering a toast, Vide's resurrection, the atmosphere ever looming, the immaculate visuals. Phase 1 Vide looks so cool, despite being what essentially amounts to a cocoon or a sarcophagus. And of course, the music. Superb. A male vocalist instead of a female this time, representing the person worshipping the fallen god in each game. Lilac for Galdera, and now Oboro for Vide. Now, I did say at the start of the review that I had checked out the finale prior to see if this game was going to be worth my time, so I knew some of the stuff that was coming. And even with that knowledge, I can honestly say that my socks were still blown off. The swap out from Team A to Team B in Phase 1 though, did not know that happened at all, so that caught me by surprise quite hard. Vide is not an easy final boss by any means. If you were to watch my VOD of this fight, you might think it was super easy with the amount of immunities and barriers and protection I was spamming. That's because if I let any of it fall at any moment, Vide would take that chance and just snowball the fuck out of me. I was sweating my ass off the entire time, and I loved it. I want more multi-phase, uber-hard boss fights that make me play at my absolute best for the entire fight. There was never time for a break in this battle. You are constantly being pushed, and it truly feels like a battle against a god. And let's not forget to mention the unique voice lines for all the main characters in this fight. Everyone popped off for this section. Really powerful declarations from each character, but I have to give the biggest props of all to Throne. Her 2 lines in this fight are probably the coldest, most badass quotes in the entire game, and I never would have expected to hear her say them, but am I ever glad she did.
Even the dawn will be mine.
Of course, we eventually pushed through and entered into Phase 2. And let me say, that transition with the one strum on the electric guitar just lingering there as we see Vide's true form, massive and intimidating, I got shivers. And then it starts playing Those Who Deny the Dawn as we get the greatest pop-up message in all of gaming. All 8 travelers will join in this battle. I sincerely think this might be my new favorite final boss theme now, considering that I was listening to it for about half a year on repeat before I even started the game and still listen to it at least once a week. I think that says something. To my knowledge, this is the only track in the game where the metal takes the lead. Usually, the music is orchestral with a rock and roll backing, but this is the one and only time that I can tell where it swaps. Combine that with the exquisite guitar section that uses the motif of For the Dawn, and it is glorious. You feel the weight of the night itself falling upon you, and this party is Atlas, holding it back with everything they've got. And Vide is sure as hell no pushover. This boss does not care in the slightest about kicking your teeth in if you let it. And having all 8 travelers fighting together with the buddy system from the mobile game, hype incarnate.
It's up to me!
I'll extend a helping hand to all those in need.
Fight a god if I must!
This is the final answer.
Take that and that and that!
For the future!
I will see this through. Light will prevail. banish the shadows.
The sacred flame!
Go, Hikari! Yes!
Experiencing such an emotional high for one of the best boss fights ever created, I was already vulnerable. So you can imagine how close I was to fully breaking down and letting it all out when we came back to the campfire and watch as each traveler departs, exiting in the reverse order that they each joined the party. It's those kinds of little details. The fact that the developers even bothered to record that order and use it here, that goes to show the love and passion they had to making this game. Oh, and naturally, they had to have At Your Back playing to make the waterworks flow even easier. Now, I honestly believe that was the end of the game. I thought that cutscene would be it, everyone goes home, and maybe a separate credits plays as I cry in the corner over the party splitting up, and the journey ending. And it did go that way, but then something happened. We fade to New Delsta, and I'm playing as Hikari all on his own. And a simply divine vocal rendition of the Octopath theme plays as I walk around the celebrating city, looking to find my party one last time. Getting to have everyone come back together was the ultimate final move. We could have had our bittersweet finale as each traveler returned to their normal lives, but no, we get one last moment to spend, not just with this amazing group of heroes, but we also get every single major side character come out of the woodworks to enjoy the festivities as well, so we can have this proper last hurrah and goodbye. It was absolutely the correct choice to have this be the game's final moments. Now you can gather up your party, but Agnea is nowhere to be found, just Paula, her sister, in her place. And once you're ready, you can head into the theater to find our little star up on stage, still living out her dream, as we get our last rousing speech from Agnea, regaling the crowd of their travels and experiences as Journey for the Dawn plays on. And when that piano kicks in with the Octopath motif, I can't keep it in anymore. My heart pours out for this incredible game as Agnea brings this story to a close, naming their tale Octopath Traveler. Love. That is the overwhelming answer to how I feel about Octopath Traveler 2. I feel immense, unrelenting, unquestioning love for this game. The team behind this work of art have reached levels of dedication, passion, and talent that I never believed I would see in this current era of the gaming industry. I am genuinely floored at just how incredible everything in this game was. I cannot praise it enough. Octopath 2 is truly, and I say this wholeheartedly, a gem of its generation. 11 years prior, we got Bravely Default from some of the same people who worked on this title, and now they have come back with a new modern masterpiece of the RPG genre. While I acknowledge that 2023 is going to go down as one of the greatest years in gaming, not only because this game came out then, but also Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, Alan Wake 2, Final Fantasy 16, and plenty of others, I fear that this game has gotten relegated to the sidelines to such a massive degree that I expect people to come back to it in a few years when they've cleared out some of their backlogs, and you will see countless people calling it a missed gem. Hold me to that now. But I won't accept that. Even if it's been over a year since release, I will acknowledge it here and now. Octopath 2 is phenomenal, it is important, and it deserves to be recognized now for the intense level of passion, talent, and dedication that was put into it, before it is forgotten. The sheer fact that the soundtrack, let alone the game, was not nominated for anything is a sin that deserves to be punished with eternal night. But I digress. In my first Octopath review, I hoped that Team Asano would take that game as a learning experience and grow from it. They didn't just grow, they bloomed into the rarest flower imaginable, crafting a true masterpiece. And the best part is, if this is how good OT2 turned out with the proper budget and time and not having to deal with a world health crisis during a good chunk of its development, then I am at a loss trying to imagine how good a new Bravely title will be, considering that they have stated that news for the series is coming sometime in 2024. At least I hope it means a new entry, but still. Hell, I took so long to get this video out that while I was still writing this script, they added more content to the game over a year after release. This isn't going to be a common thing, just to be clear, but seeing them add bonus fights where you can battle the main cast of the first Octopath out of nowhere, along with a rematch against Vita with some of the craziest abilities I've ever seen, that is true dedication to the craft. These are my favorite kinds of post-games, the most insanely difficult challenges for the best of the best to test themselves with. I still haven't even beaten New Galdera yet. I'll get around to it though. I did it once, I can do it again. If this excessively long review has convinced you in any way to try it, grabbed your attention even in the slightest, then I fully implore you to pick it up. If you were burned by the first game, if you felt let down and disappointed by it and are feeling anxious about giving this series another chance, then let me give you a push. Go for it. I felt the exact same way about OT1, and I can wholeheartedly say that this is an improvement in every single regard that I wanted to see. In an age where gaming companies push out unfinished products and expect you to pay triple-digit prices, I say this: if I had to purchase Octopath 2 again, I would not even bat an eye at paying full price. This is totally worth the price tag. This is, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest game I've ever played. I had very middling opinions on the first game, which was upsetting because I really wanted to love this new series from the people that made my favorite games of all time. But now, having experienced the wonders and woes this game had to offer, I can finally say it, from the tip of the mountains to the edge of the sea. I love Octopath Traveler 2. Thank you very much for watching through this absurdly long review. I had a lot of things I needed to rant about and get off my chest in relation to this game, so thanks for hearing me out on all of it. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, it helps so much, and I'm ever grateful to each of you who does. If you like RPGs and such, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm planning to expand out into more series over the coming months, and I already have a big backlog of Bravely Default content if that interests you. Well, that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.